Ryan TRAHAN and Haley PHAM need to press pause before they make an irreversible decision that could affect them for the rest of their lives. Let me just start by saying that I don't take the judgment of someone else's life choices lightly. This isn't something that I do in my everyday life, and to be honest, I really hope not to do something like this again. There's the famous proverb that says, if you point the finger at someone, 3 fingers point back at you. And in addressing criticism of their proposal, Ryan himself tweeted out, if our decisions do emotionally upset you, I sincerely encourage you to have a personal conversation with yourself before you make judgments of others. So yes, in the past few months, I've seriously self-reflected on why this situation irks me so much. I won't lie, I'm a little envious of their success on the platform. I mean, who wouldn't be? Maybe I'm a little jealous that Ryan gave up a promising running career and had talent that I would kill for. You know, metaphorically, of course. Perhaps as someone from the Northeast, I have prejudice or ignorance toward the religious fundamentalist lifestyle common in the South and Southwest. And as I level criticism on the naivete and immaturity of the young couple, similar indictments could be made of myself and my eventual wife at that age. So I've taken great lengths to make universal value judgments that respect cultural relativism. It's unfair for me to extrapolate the morality of my life choices and the context behind them to people who are growing up in a different time and in a different part of the country. In practice, this means that I will not be creating a thesis against marrying young in general. Rather, I will be advocating that this particular couple do not marry young based on primary sources. We've all had mothers and teachers tell us, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. There's some wisdom behind this statement to the extent that criticism should have a purpose beyond hurting the feelings of another person. The way that calling your sister an idiot for failing a math test is rude, but helping tutor her and politely correcting mistakes on her homework is perfectly reasonable. But this sentiment is all too often applied to situations where good faith criticism is necessary to change an unhealthy status quo. In the situation of content consumption, you, the consumer, are entitled to a negative view of a movie you didn't like or an album that disappointed you. This criticism is a healthy part of a feedback mechanism that allows content creators to grow and, if they choose, better tailor their content to the taste of the audience. Ryan and Haley create content based primarily on their life choices. You, the viewer who sits through their ads on their videos, you have the right to take a critical approach on their decisions and question the logic behind them. You, the person who follows them on Instagram and sees their content pop up on your feed, you have the right to publicly express your dislike of their merch or that you think they're annoying or whatever it may be. A couple who publicly documents their lifestyle as their primary output is not immune from criticism, and in a healthy creator-audience relationship, this good faith criticism can serve to both improve their content and their way of life. You are not a bad or morally deficient person for delivering this criticism. This is why the most concerning thing about the saga of Ryan and Haley is that their young, impressionable audience by and large doesn't yet have the facilities or life experience to offer a sensible counterbalance to the warp speed at which Ryan and Haley are currently living. Conversely, their ill-advised lifestyle is marketed to this pubescent audience as wholesome, mature, and relatable when it is anything but. The central theme of their story is ultimately that kids and irresponsible young adults are driving this ship. On one hand, I believe they should be treated with compassion and understanding because they're young people trying to make their way through the world in a strange time and in unusual and stressful personal circumstances. However, with their large youth following comes a responsibility to reflect on the messaging and example they're setting, and they're currently unable and/or unwilling to engage in this self-reflection. I started watching Ryan's channel in the early summer of 2017. I was very interested in running at the time, so naturally I stumbled upon Ryan's content. Ryan had just graduated Rice High School in Texas as the valedictorian. He was a track standout with a mile PR of 4:15, and he was preparing to enter Texas A&M as a D1 recruit. After graduation, he started consistently uploading on his channel, making videos about running advice, advertising his water bottle company Neptune, and started his popular series on how to turn a penny into $1,000. These videos document an ambitious and enterprising teenager and someone who is extraordinarily affable to the point where practically every video captures him interacting with different groups of people. Today in the running vlogging crossover community, there are multiple professional groups in Boulder, pros like Gwen Jorgensen and former pros like Nick Simmons doing more challenge type running content, and talented amateurs like Zach Levet, Spencer Brown, and Easton Allen who have high production values. Back in 2017, however, the space was comparatively anemic, with people like Sage Canaday and Ben Barrows opting for a soul-crushingly formal style of presentation, and even Spencer and Soren Knudsen hadn't really figured out how to engage their audience quite yet.
Eating rice and the beans and the big corn.
But Ryan was a natural. He had a blend of a 60 FPS camera, technically sound advice, nice transitions and graphics, and most importantly, relatability. He presented a clear picture of how hard work got him from point A as an unathletic freshman to point B as a D1 recruit and a genuine talent. It wasn't in an aloof, ultra-competitive sort of way either, but more like the result of a ceaselessly positive attitude that was inclusive and encouraging of his audience to achieve their dreams as he, the everyman, did. This is kind of uncommon in the highest levels of running, where talent tends to exhibit itself much earlier in life. The pros were never going to be mere mortals like the rest of us. Ryan was like a proxy for the audience into this world. However, things did not go as planned when Ryan entered college. Because he used his image as a college athlete to promote his company Neptune in his videos, he was deemed ineligible for competition by the NCAA. This was semi-big news in the college sports world, like there were articles about this in Sports Illustrated. If Ryan were to remain an athlete at Texas A&M, he would either have to A, remove all Texas A&M related content from his YouTube channel as to avoid using his status as an athlete to sell product, or B, entirely distance himself and his image from the operation of his company. I think everybody these days agrees that the NCAA is a draconian institution, and the doctrine of amateurism, particularly when applied outside the major sports, is unfair and antiquated. This was a ridiculous conundrum to be placed in as an 18-year-old kid to choose between his two passions in such a binary way. In the end, Ryan chose option C, to drop out of school completely and dedicate himself entirely to his business and the YouTube channel.
Because I thought about this for months, right? I thought about it every single day. It's a calculated risk. I'm not doing it kind of with my fingers crossed, hoping that things work out. It's something that I'm very comfortable with. I don't recommend dropping out or risking something like crazy if you don't know exactly what you're gonna do, know exactly, where you're gonna go.
This was quite a controversial decision, and contrary to the general tone of this video, I actually supported this decision at the time. It's easy to approve of this decision in retrospect, as his channel totally blew up, while the NCAA might not even exist anymore due to COVID. But I think his maneuver, while risky, had sufficient exit strategies with little downside. At worst, his channel and business don't work out after a year or two, and he comes back to university with a more precise vision of how college could benefit his future career prospects. College is not for everyone at the ripe age of 18, and for a young entrepreneurial spirit like Ryan, I can't imagine a worse fit. Like, no way is he sitting in Chem 101 passing up time-sensitive business ventures and getting value for his education. I think the blowback from his choice came mostly from the running community that didn't fully comprehend his passion for business. Yes, he was a stud at running, but he wasn't a stud among studs at his age like Drew Hunter, Josh Kerr, or even somebody younger like Jakob Ingebrigtsen. At his level, he would have had to play the development lottery to truly become elite. And if he had passions elsewhere and wanted to pull the plug early, I really don't blame him. So after dropping out of college, Ryan kept living with his A&M buddies, plus a few additions. This crew included myself, Theo Goff, Brett Brock, and George Saborin. In my opinion, this era was when Ryan was putting out his best content. The stop jogging, start sprinting beef he started with Vegan Fit, fucking hilarious. I visit those videos at least 3 times a year.
Oh shit.
Some of his more astutely targeted videos, like the Emma Chamberlain Instagram recreation vid, were raking in some serious views. And even some of the offshoot videos, like the Yarrow collaboration about Melanie and Scotty O, were amazing.
Can't get an orgasm from hugging.
At this point, Ryan was still putting out great running content too, like the Roommate Mile and his training vlogs, and even making some legitimate mini documentaries like the Breaking 3 and his Eugene Marathon documentary where he ran at 2:36. Shout out to Eddie, by the way. But all his videos benefited from the creative environment he was in, where all of his roommates were at some level on board with the self-starting YouTube lifestyle. And they each had their own personalities too. Like Yarrow was the dopey go with the flow kind of guy, Theo was the daredevil with a loose screw that you could never relax around because you never knew what sort of trouble he was going to get in. Brett was the sensitive one with the amazing hair, and George was just George.
Was that George? One more time for the people in the back.
But it was a fun, vibrant group, and you could feel it in the videos. Some of the content were misses. As an 18-year-old with limited experience preparing his own food, his nutrition content was accordingly vapid. and some of the motivational monologues he experimented with came off a little patronizing. But on the whole, this was a fun time to be following Ryan's journey. The big evolution in its content came with the Lauren Gray video, published in June of 2018. This video, while not his first foray into a more conventional commentary format, was definitely the most polished and, in my opinion, his best creation to date. What's important to understand is that compared to how other big players operate in the commentary arena, in the Lauren Gray video, he was extraordinarily soft with the subject, almost to the point of admiration. Instead of delivering roasts about Lauren personally, Ryan makes humorous observations about little things in the background of her content, things you'd never notice, but once you do, you can't help but agree they're hilarious. This might sound neutered compared to commentary topics general audiences are used to, like how Jake Paul is scamming us or how Instagram stuntmen have gone too far, but this self-deprecating tone works. The flow of the video is technically sound, the props and set pieces don't feel forced, and the famous comment reading,
I love you. I love you. I love you.
This video has 9.4 million views and is Ryan's third most watched video to date. It also came with a massive boost in subscriber count. The Lauren Gray video signified an abrupt shift away from the running content that he started with and the group vlogs toward a more traditional internet commentary personality repertoire. Shortly afterwards, in late June, Ryan posted a recap of his experience at VidCon 2018. This is where he and his audience first meet Haley Pham. I'm not going to delve too much into the lore of Haley Pham because I only became aware of her in 2018, but I'll do my best to get the timeline as accurate as possible. Haley Pham Goodman started uploading content to YouTube in 2012 at the young age of 10. Her first video was a lipstick lip gloss tutorial. She started uploading more consistently in 2014 under the moniker Tippies, with a variety of content you'd expect from a young teenage girl. Things like fashion routines, shopping hauls, challenges with friends, and dance content. Watching through these videos, you'll notice right away that Haley has an effervescent personality and interacts organically with the camera. Her fast cuts communicate her scatterbrain tangents really well, and generally the videos document a girl you or I might have known at that age.
What makes you think that I have a crush?
But as a young content creator, she actually comes across as a legitimate role model for girls her age. She stresses the importance of doing well in school and has aspirations to study dance in college. Her channel stands out because of the colorful design not only of the thumbnails, but of the settings, clothing, makeup, and accessories. This bright, bubbly, colorful aesthetic eventually translated into the girly pop brand that saw an array of merch sold. She also started a separate vlog channel documenting some vacations, trips to dance competitions, and other Vlogmas events. By 2016, Haley had 200,000 subscribers and was growing at a modest rate. Her content began to shift to being a little more explicitly autobiographical, telling embarrassing stories from school and painting a picture of someone with mild social anxieties in public, but a level of comfort in front of the camera that allows her to convey her experiences to a similar audience that would otherwise lack a voice. Stories about feeling slighted by her idiot geometry teacher, implicitly calling her stupid, how she fell into a chocolate fountain while wearing a white top, and the instant classic about how she held a poop in during a dance performance and rushed into the stall with no toilet paper. No, honestly, that one was hilarious. Go check it out. Link in description. In this respect, she was kind of like a proto-relatable YouTuber before neurosis and anxiety were chic. One element of her persona that distinguished her from her peers was her openness with her faith as a Christian. I feel like this was a pretty courageous move to bring a divisive topic like religion into the mix at an almost post-theistic time in America compared to 20 years ago. And her risk paid off because her supporters were enthusiastic about this reveal, to say the least. In a way, I think she maybe unknowingly curated her good girl audience to naturally support this part of her lifestyle. This aspect of her personality had a small minority of detractors, however. In 2016, she apparently uploaded a video in which she criticized her high school for teaching evolution and subsequently deleted it when the comments became too critical. There were other isolated incidents during this period where comments are locked, and you could find some anecdotes about these instances online. Things like saying she wanted to move out because her room wasn't aesthetic enough, and a Demi Lovato transformation video where she made a joke about her overdose.
Honey, with the chance of drug abuse. But then there's gonna be one Demi fan who's like, I can't believe you would say that. I mean, we're all human. We all struggle with some drug abuse from time to time in our lives.
As a young teenage girl, I get why you'd want to insulate yourself from some of the bad elements that come along with internet fame. And from a mental health standpoint, this is probably healthy for a developing mind to an extent. However, with the deletion of negative reactions comes a certain lack of accountability, regardless of how minor her transgressions were during this period. I think her unwillingness to interact with the critical faction of her fan base would set the stage for the issues later to come. Haley started experiencing massive growth on her channel in 2018. This growth can be attributed to two things: her vagina hair removal series and the rise of relatable content on YouTube. In January of 2018, Haley uploaded "Testing Stripper Life Hacks for Shaving My Bikini Line." The video begins with a plea to her dad not to watch, and then she goes on to use tips from a stripper's Reddit post about shaving her bikini line. The concept has obvious appeal, right? Like, good Christian girl ironically takes advice from a stripper about body care. Not only that, but it drives right at the heart of the relatability ethos of the era. Everybody has to deal with hygiene in privates in some capacity, and her forthcoming yet awkward presentation is identifiable. This video today has 10 million views and was followed up with a now deleted vagina waxing video and a sequel. This vagina waxing video was my first exposure to Haley, and I still find it her best video to date. It's the female equivalent of that scene from 40-Year-Old Virgin, and even though I don't have a vagina, I had to cringe at every rip of the tape when I saw this.
1, 2,
No, Kelly Clarkson!
Because of these hugely popular videos, Haley got lumped into a class of relatable YouTubers, spearheaded by Emma Chamberlain. These comparisons were apt to the point of imitation. Around the same time, Haley uploaded a "What High School is Like" video that was accused of being excessively similar to an Emma Chamberlain video on the same topic. She made a response in defense of the video, but eventually deleted both. Regardless, Haley was a beneficiary of the relatability movement, and her large following today thrive from this trend. Concurrently with this growth, Haley's personal life off camera became turbulent to say the least. Around the same time that her channel started blowing up, her parents got divorced and her mom lost her job. Not only that, but Haley became the primary breadwinner for her mom via earnings from YouTube and still remains in this benefactory role today. I believe most of Haley's personal issues stem not from an inherent flaw, but from the pressure and continuing trauma from this situation. And that's what I think previous commentators have overlooked in this story. It's all too easy to see the Grease video, for example, and see the stereotype of the entitled, bratty, young internet personality, but that conclusion ignores relevant context and any sense of empathy. Her YouTube channel, which used to be a creative outlet, almost overnight became her primary means to support herself and her family. And for a style of content that depends on being authentic on camera, this sort of psychic pressure on a young sheltered girl would evidently take its toll and be reflected in the quality of the content. Not only that, but her life decisions and lack of apparent personal growth have been adversely influenced by the circumstances. This brings us to late June of 2018, when Haley meets Ryan TRAHAN for the first time. I won't lie, the first time Ryan and Haley met was pretty endearing. And even though they say their first meeting didn't kindle an initial attraction as Haley had a boyfriend at the time, it's easy to see how these two would get together on paper. Both are super ambitious and share a passion for their content. They value intentional dating or dating solely for the purpose of marriage, and I wouldn't be surprised if their shared outlook on relationship was shaped by their home lives, with Haley being a child of divorce and Ryan being raised primarily by a single father. They formed an initial collaborative relationship, with Ryan appearing in a few of Haley's videos as a featured guest and vice versa, like the video where Haley teaches Ryan how to wax his mangina.
What?
But they didn't start dating until a few months after their initial meeting. As they tell the story, on their first date, they sat outside and took the pair survey 31 questions to fall in love. Ostensibly compatible, they began a long-distance relationship. In these early stages of the relationship, as an older person, I couldn't help but feel like I was watching a modern incarnation of the American dream. After all, YouTuber is currently the most desirable profession by kids today. Like, instead of Luigi coming to America after World War I to start a pizza place in Brooklyn and investing his earnings into buying Ford stocks on margin, now today we have influencer boy and influencer girl score big on the algorithm and start a media empire by producing family content. Maybe Jake Paul's the modern day Jay Gatsby, who knows. After the Lauren Gray video, Ryan and I moved to Tampa, Florida to collaborate with Rohan from Rohan TV and the Ireland Boys. Ryan was in full-blown commentary e-boy mode this year, starting a variety of ironic DIY craft projects, the best of which by far had to be the James Charles makeup tutorial. then abruptly switching to pure commentary for a little while and even landing a collaboration with Danny Gonzalez. Personally, this content didn't resonate with me the same way that the Lauren Gray video did, or even some of his earlier commentary content like the Vegan Fit Saga. Two reasons might be because this new crop of videos felt a little too synthesized specifically for views, and I don't think his young guy persona was jaded enough or had enough edge to do some truly exceptional commentary. As an example, I invite you to compare Ryan's Soulja Boy console video with John Tron's video on the same topic. The reason why I think the Lauren Gray video was unique in this regard is because the topic isn't necessarily worthy of a hard-hitting commentary. A well-executed prod and poke is a totally appropriate strategy in that case, but I don't want a prod and poke on someone who is scamming their fan base, more like a dunk and dab. Regardless, these videos did quite well, with the Morgs video being a standout, getting 5 million views. Haley's content more or less stayed consistent after they met, maybe a little more styled and targeted for popular viewing. Not that teen relatable beauty content was ever really in my wheelhouse, but I personally find these videos significantly less engaging than her high school vlogs, which by comparison felt so much more authentic and purposeful. But the real shift in quality, in my opinion, came around the time that Haley dropped out of high school in October of 2018. We really only have her perspective of the decision in a video titled "How YouTube Got Me Kicked Out of High School." In the video, she talks about an incident where she filmed a video in school with her friend and they pretended to cheat on a test. This cheating video circulated among the staff until she was called into a formal meeting with the disciplinary council where her and her friend were suspended from National Honor Society and she was handed a temporary suspension from school. This video shows Haley clearly flustered and feeling unfairly judged by her teachers, a sentiment mimicked years earlier in the idiot geometry teacher vid.
This guy has the audacity to tell me that he thinks he knows my character. Has he ever really even met me? No. Does he know about me in real life at all? No. Did I just cry in front of him and gave this heartwarming speech about who I really am and apologizing? But he still believes that he knows better than anyone, really. He really knows my character, and that character is a disrespectful delinquent. So sure, I didn't show up as much as they wanted me to. You literally elected me to be like one of the top positions of your stupid National Honor Club. I don't belittle your job as a teacher, so I would appreciate if you did the same for me. For these teachers to be stupider than the literal kids who watch my video, I was so respectful to teachers, I was respectful to kids, and I was just making fun of this teacher's voice. It is your duty as teachers to help us navigate through our missteppings and learn lessons from them in order to become matured citizens. So thank you for holding me accountable for my actions. I have grown from them and will continue to learn. The things people joke about on YouTube, I don't think cheating is the worst thing I could have done.
And if we take what she says in this video as truth, the teachers gossiping about her is incredibly unprofessional and, in my opinion, believable. But what is missing from this half-hour video is an internal locus of control and self-reflection on the situation. Her narrative focuses entirely on how she feels like a victim, and she doesn't seem to process how her actions, yes, even joking about cheating is serious, have consequences. Her own failings are minimized and turned around on those that she feels judged by. If I read between the lines though, I wouldn't be surprised if the school was fed up with her truancy and put down the hammer when it got the chance. In her vlogs leading up to her dropping out, she showed a clear lack of motivation and interest in studies, perhaps spurred by her decision that she was not going to attend college straight out of high school.
One time I got a comment that was like, you know, honey, like the social media thing isn't gonna last forever, so you should go to college. That's actually very reversed, because if social media isn't going to last forever, then shouldn't I do that first, since college will always be there?
Yeah.
Because me not going to college next year doesn't mean I can never go to college if I...
Now, similar to my thoughts on Ryan dropping out of college, I think if Haley had graduated high school and opted out of college to run her internet enterprise, as she outlines in the video Why I'm Not Going to College, she could have been in a pretty good place. She would be far better off riding the gravy train while it lasts and picking up the education later when she's ready and motivated. But there is no equivalency between Ryan's case of dropping out of college after 2 months and Haley dropping out of high school with less than a year left. And let's be clear, Haley did not get kicked out of school. She only got suspended and she dropped out on her own accord. She claims she didn't go back because she thought the teachers would have been prejudiced against her from this incident, and maybe so. But that isn't justification for throwing a degree away when it's so close. Moreover, if her future really was untenable at this school, she could have transferred elsewhere to finish the degree. I think if she had stayed at school, her content could have been just as successful, if not more. She would have continued her education and stayed more grounded and relatable, a problem with her content which became apparent later, and had better future college and employment outcomes than she will have now. And while the decision was ultimately Haley's, let's not forget that at the time she was only a 17-year-old girl and supporting herself and her mom, while all of these new financial options surely muddled the decision-making process. I think both her mom and Ryan failed her in this regard if they did not strongly encourage her to finish the degree. What bothers me about this the most is not that an impulsive decision was made under duress, but that she doesn't seem to comprehend her decision was suboptimal and incredibly context specific when addressing it to her audience. Even to this day, she advertises a shared kinship with a young entrepreneurial cohort, one that I think is partially unearned. Take, for example, the video College Dropouts Give Their Opinion on College, filmed in August of 2019, almost a year after she dropped out of high school. Here, she vlogs an evening trip to the grocery store with the two Ryans, where they have a conversation about college.
If you guys had to go to college, what would you major in?
I did go to college.
Haley muses on her friends being sad to leave their hometowns to go to college. They discuss the disadvantages of attending expensive schools out of state and loosely adjust judgment they face from leaving the education system prematurely. Even though Haley hedges her position,
I just feel like it's kind of offensive that just because I'm not going to college, it's like I'm bad because I'm advocating for everyone to not go to college, because that's clearly just not the message at all.
the ultimate message
What is your message?
Do what you want to do.
is disingenuous. Ryan took on significant risk to drop out of college and focus on his business when he only had 20,000 subscribers. Haley, on the other hand, had 1 million subscribers and was already making significant income when she left high school. The only thing she risked was a high school diploma that was well within reach. The do what you want to do message only works if you have the financial security to support it, something that in this video is nauseatingly taken for granted.
Like, if you don't want to go to college, that's great, and if you do, that's also great. It's if you want to do that.
As long as you're living your best life.
Yeah, as long as you're happy with yourself, at the end of the day, you can say that you're fulfilled.
You're winning.
Then good on you, bud.
Most people, if they drop out of school, do not have the financial freedom nor the followers to dedicate themselves to an e-celeb career. Most people in the real world without a high school diploma or with only a high school diploma have to work shitty jobs, live in shitty apartments, and eat shitty food. Even people with college degrees and beyond have to work shitty jobs anyways.
I think it's like my, 7 Enneagram personality type, but when I don't want to do something, I physically cannot get myself to do it.
They can't just do what they want to do.
Do what you want to do.
You won't catch me defending the extortionate prices of college or the implicit societal pressure funnel putting unwitting kids into student debt. But the conversation in this video generally reduces the value of an education to the extent that it can serve you financially. And as people who had already been served financially, the de-emphasis of the fundamental metaphysical good of education is not only ignorant, but also a terrible precedent to set for a young audience. If Haley believed otherwise, she probably would have pursued a GED by now. After dropping out, Haley, her mom, and her aunt moved into an apartment in Austin, Texas. Her content by this point consisted primarily of clothing transformations and shopping hauls, though there were some other videos sprinkled in. A trip to Bali with Ryan, a modeling trip to the Bahamas where she played with the famous pigs, and several trips to Tampa to see Ryan. This era began a loss of identity that still plagues her content today. Her former narration of the relatable teen girl high school experience disappeared as she jumped into YouTube full time. This void was filled with a hesitant materialism and image obsession that was especially present in the transformation videos. These videos would play out something like this. Haley outlines a look or aesthetic that she wants to transform into, distances herself from the style with quotes like, "I would never wear this in real life."
But I just don't like wearing any sort of clothing that hugs my body to show my figure.
Puts on the outfit and looks visibly uncomfortable, and then later tacitly embraces the look she just trashed. Nowhere was this more obvious than in the spending $2,000 to be Crazy Rich Asians transformation challenge. In this video, Haley and genetically unrelated guest PHAM spend an exorbitant sum of money to imitate fashion from the popular movie Crazy Rich Asians. In practice, they purchase designer handbags and sunglasses. To put it bluntly, this video is cringe, and not just because she interrupts her guest several times.
Okay, so what are we doing today? Actually, I'll explain it. With these huge sunglasses,
They just like don't want to be seen. They're like, don't take pictures. Don't take pictures.
because that makes you look pretty rich. Now it's for my favorite time.
Caking our face.
Yes, exactly.
Family. And
Oh yeah, my last name's Pham.
As described, Haley has an existential crisis over how wearing Gucci will affect her perception online, and that's not an exaggeration.
Also, I gave this whole speech about how I don't like people looking at me because I don't want them to like look at me and then think I have money, because I don't want people to think I have money because that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I'm not gonna lie, I looked up pictures of girls wearing it and it kind of does make your outfits look cute. So now I'm really stressed because it's like, is it bad if I wear it? You know, like, is it? I don't know. I'm really just confused.
Only 7 months later, she seems to have no issue with the gaudy luxury accessories. This struggle is representative of much of the content in this period and is frankly uncomfortable to watch. Hailey seems to equate clothing with personality, and rather than temporarily embrace the novelty of a new style, she instead puts trepidation on full display. Considering the circumstances, it's not so surprising. The building blocks of her identity, and in particular her relatable internet persona, used to be the activities she engaged in and the friends she spent time with. After dropping out, quitting dance, and moving away from her friends, her channel became an emotionally vacuous trend-hopping outlet, hopelessly in search of something human. Hailey actually addressed this transition in a video subtitled "Addressing Your Concerns," where she revealed that she was going to start therapy. Nevertheless, this depersonalization continued throughout the year. In February of 2019, just 6 months after Ryan and I moved to Tampa, we moved back to Austin in the same apartment building as Hailey. This period correlated with another content evolution for Ryan. In March, Ryan abruptly left the commentary arena to produce a variety of polished challenge-style content over the next year, often being called Mr. Beast Light. This content included DIY crafts, a 0 to a million TikTok follower series, and a Surviving on 1 penny series. In comparison to the commentary-style videos, this avenue of challenge content really played to Ryan's strengths as a creator and his personality as an ambitious optimist. The content felt fresh and well produced, and even some of the lower effort videos like the "I lowballed people on Facebook Marketplace" video were creative in concept and hilarious in execution.
2017 BMW i8. Can you meet me in the middle?
The one-off videos like "I made a vlog in the 1990s" and "White boys try learning hip-hop dance routine in 15 minutes" also worked great and kept the content from feeling formulaic. The stark difference between Ryan's quickly expanding channel and Hailey's stale content in the summer of 2019 was palpable. But while Ryan was outwardly pulling off these content transitions so confidently, he recently revealed to his audience in a video titled "I Need to Get This Off My Chest" that he was feeling depressed and aimless in July of 2019.
At this time, I was making the most money I've ever made. I was getting more views than I've ever gotten, and I mean, everything was going well. And the crazy thing is, I remember that summer when I was on top of the world metrically. That was the first time I feel like I've experienced depression.
This video was released while I was putting this together, and it really changed my perspective on the psychology of Ryan. I'd initially built up this internal narrative that Ryan was driven by proving the doubters wrong, as evidenced by his valedictorian speech.
They tell you that you can't make it to the pros, you can't build a great company, you can't build the house of your dreams, you can't make a real difference, you can't change the world. You can't.
Not that there's anything morally reprehensible about this attitude. In fact, there are lots of examples of highly successful people that owe their accomplishments to their desire to make fools out of people who try to limit them. But I think there's a line where arrogant defiance stops being productive. For Ryan, using the naysayers as motivation to work in overdrive at building his company and his channel was for sure the right approach in the high-stakes entrepreneurial arena. But my impression was that he was stubbornly extending that attitude toward building out other aspects of his life, like buying a house and getting married, areas that require patience and don't typically reward those who force it. But after watching his latest confessional video, I think Ryan is just postponing an impending burnout, and he's seeking out the next big stimulus because he doesn't have the guidance to know where to go next. It's tragic. Like, here's a kid who's supposed to represent the best of us. He set lofty goals of being the best YouTuber on the platform, and more or less achieved some version of that. He made a ton of money from a business he built himself, found love along the way, and generally lived a Zoomer life to the fullest. And yet this fantasy is hollow to the point where even Ryan's unbridled optimism and self-confidence could deteriorate into depression. I feel like there's a cautionary tale somewhere in this. An older generation might view it as the folly of making a career out of narcissism, or maybe that a lack of major failures in life makes it hard for a high achiever to truly appreciate their successes. I don't think that it's my place to draw that conclusion for Ryan, but at the very least, it's a positive sign for his personal development that he's contemplating the need for a philosophical satisfaction in life beyond the traditional superficial notions of success.
I'm just gonna make whatever I want, and I hope that that satisfies me, because I realize money's not gonna do it, views aren't gonna do it.
what's gonna do it? I don't know.
However, as I'll discuss later, propping up an addiction to novelty by rushing into life milestones is the exact wrong way to approach this issue. Suddenly, in August of 2019, the internet was graced with a new family channel. Meet
the Trey family.
After an initial Q&A video, the couple posted a shocking video, house shopping at 18 years old, and our first major subject of critique. Here, we see Ryan and Haley, a couple that has not lived together and dated for less than a year, tour $1 million+ homes with intent to buy. The financial aspect of this decision will be dissected in the following section, but from a content standpoint, this video was divisive. While the majority of the fan base lauded Ryan and Haley for taking a next step in their relationship, a vocal minority questioned the prudence of the move and observed the video as yet another example of relatable YouTubers losing touch with their audience. An ideological divide among the fan base would germinate from the house shopping video. The Stan faction arguing in favor of an age-independent path through life events, and a cynical clique that took a more skeptical approach to two young wealthy YouTubers blowing through relationship stages. In a sense, both groups do not respect the context of the individuals and reduce the argument to a question of how young is too young to experience life milestones. While I agree with the conclusions of the cynics, the supporting evidence lies not with universal truths about relationships and age, but rather with the immaturity that Ryan and Haley display in their content. Ryan and Haley eventually bought a $1.5 million house outside Austin in October. That September would spell disaster for Haley and her brand. In the middle of the month, Ryan, Haley, and her mom traveled to Italy and Santorini, Greece to celebrate their 1-year anniversary of dating. In the vlog of their trip, Haley compares views of the beaches to Instagram and Pinterest pictures.
Because it looks like the real life Instagram pictures, and it looks like they use a sparkling app over the water.
Reception on this video was negative, but it was about to get a whole lot worse. The next week, Haley uploaded a video recap of the trip. The title was "I Lost $10,000 and Caught a Rare Disease Storytime," but it is more well known as the Grease video. If there was a Mount Rushmore of instantaneous self-inflicted social media catastrophes, the Grease video would no doubt occupy a spot right next to the Logan Paul Suicide Forest video. What makes the Grease video such an anomaly in the art of the cancel is that Haley managed to offend like 5 different groups of people at once. In the video, she describes how she lost $10,000 booking flights for the wrong date.
I realized that I booked the hotel for a month before we were gonna be there. And I don't know if you know how expensive it is to book an international flight the day before you leave.
She dissuades her followers from traveling to Greece because it's not as pretty as the Instagram pictures and it's struggling financially.
I highly discourage you from going to Greece. Not only are they economically struggling and just the government is kind of struggling right now, but it's just like not fun. Santorini is not as pretty as the Instagram bloggers make it seem.
She complains that airport security wouldn't let Ryan re-enter after picking up his camera from Lost and Found.
Like, I feel like in America, people are like, oh, like he's about to miss his flight, just like let him get his camera and go. But these people were just not budging.
Also, she got a vaginal infection on the trip and thought that because she was saving herself for marriage, she was too pure for that misfortune.
I literally went through like a stage where I was kind of like angry at God because I was like, why would I literally like wait to do anything sexually and yet still like my vagina is the thing that's getting punished? Like, why me of all people?
And she criticized nurses at the urgent care for not being real doctors.
She's not even like a real this is kind of offensive. Like, I know that nurses are still doctors, but she wasn't like an actual like doctor.
The blowback was immediate and severe. Seriously, this thing made national news, and even in Greece. Comments were disabled quickly and the video was eventually deleted. An apology was uploaded to her smaller vlog channel a week later and eventually removed. In total, she lost around 20,000 subscribers and the steady growth on her channel abruptly halted. I don't want to analyze how huge of a blunder this episode was, as several news articles and commentary videos summed the general reaction quite well. However, I would like to address 2 components of this debacle that I believe the commentary community overlooked. First, I think both critical commentators and later the Haley apologists both misrepresent the context behind the Grease video. While critics and news outlets use Haley as the scapegoat for internet fame and entitlement, I think it's too often ignored that Haley really wasn't so out of touch even 2 years prior. The Grease video, while broadly representative of the societal ills of social media culture, was a culmination of a year of stress in a young girl's tumultuous life. In that sense, as unsympathetic as her character presented was, I think the community should have directed more of their ire toward the unhealthy advertising system in place that can corrupt unprepared and ignorant youth YouTubers rather than towards the individual. Conversely, after the apology video, the fanbase was ready to take her back from cancel hell and seemed incredulous at the thought of the Grease video being anything other than an isolated slip-up, and a mild one at that. However, what this faction fails to address is that, again, the Grease video was not a single moment, but a climax. Haley's identity crisis and degradation of relatability since dropping out of high school was palpable all throughout the year, and especially in the content leading up to the Grease video. That the fanbase could be so uncritical of Haley indicates that true accountability would not prevail, and if anything, her relation with the larger internet community would only get worse. But what the Grease video also reveals is that absent from Haley's life is an opposing force to keep her in check. Under no circumstances would anybody with an ounce of tact watch the Grease video and approve it for public release. And if we momentarily give a pass to Haley, since self-reflection doesn't seem to be in her wheelhouse, somebody on her team, whether it be her mom, Ryan, her manager Charlie, somebody should have caught this before it went out. And even if they didn't have access to the video before release, somebody should have let Haley know that it's okay to get a vaginal infection if you're a virgin, or that you can't blame an entire country on falling into a tourist trap. Her entitled attitude has been enabled by her over-forgiving fan base, but also by the people around her, and her aversion to criticism will eventually create disaster even worse than this. But 2019 wasn't done with Haley. Right after the Grease episode, with subscribers and views dropping rapidly, comments on the following videos were almost uniformly negative and condemning now that the dam had broken. Haley attempted to stage a comeback, more or less beginning with a 24-inch hair extension video. As part of an elaborate rebrand strategy, she started explicitly teasing the launch of a new business venture. In November, she posted a video preparing to launch my first company. In the video, she tells her audience that she's been hiding an entrepreneurial side of her personality because of societal stigmas against females in the corporate world, and boldly embraces this new facet of herself by donning a gray sweater and blazer combo.
You know, hence the outfit. This is me embracing my new sense of self.
In short, none of this video works. For someone who's released countless clothing transformation videos and has clearly struggled with questions of identity and purpose, this episode comes across as a thinly veiled phase, which is super unfortunate because a worthy cause like empowering female entrepreneurship deserves far better than to be reduced to an exercise in dress-up. The next week, the super secret business venture was revealed to be another clothing line. The Retro Reprise line consisted of gratuitously oversized Memphis Group-inspired yellow sweatshirts and sweatpants, as well as socks, scrunchies, and hair ties. The line was the exaggerated logical conclusion of the girly pop brand, childlike to a fault. Feedback was by and large negative, with the style being the butt of several jokes. The Retro Reprise brand reveal was supposed to remedy her image, which was quickly spiraling out of control, but it only fostered another wedge between her and her dwindling fan base. In some respects, I feel quite a bit of empathy for Haley on this one. It's clear that she had personally and emotionally invested in this venture, and for an artist to have their creation publicly shamed in such a resounding fashion must have been defeating, to say the least. But the failure of Retro Reprise fits into the broader Haley fan narrative. Not only was the rollout sloppy and rushed, but the design was too heavily informed by Haley's taste without accounting for the tastes of her audience. Haley had lost touch, and this was further proof. 2 weeks later, Haley uploaded an apology video of sorts titled "Something Needs to Change." Compared to the Grease apology video and her petulant demeanor all year, this video came as a needed injection of honesty and authenticity. In the video, she self-diagnoses the change in personality over the past year stemming from dropping out of high school and losing all the things that used to keep her grounded, as well as the stresses of supporting her mom.
And I think where I went wrong is because of that pressure that I put on myself, I no longer let myself just make videos that were true to me. I started getting really stressed out about like if something was gonna get views or if people would like me or if I, you know, like had a trendy personality and all that stuff.
What's particularly refreshing about this video is that Haley doesn't avoid criticism and dissent the way that she typically had in the past. And if anything, it's heartbreaking to see how insecurities and stress plagued her decisions and personality over the past year. But as promising as this video was for signaling a new direction for Haley, the stagnation of her content lingered. While the clothing transformations were largely removed from the repertoire, nothing seemed to consistently capture her audience's attention the way that her older videos used to. And with videos like TikTok experiment what gets more views being poorly disguised excuses to wear more revealing clothes, in the series of pointless 2-week workout transformations, it wasn't a stretch to think that Haley was still struggling to find meaning beyond her vapid YouTube content. All of this while Ryan had again experienced another revitalization in his content. The two most popular videos in this period, with 10 million views each, were the Instagram celebrity Photoshop video and the Tesla autopilot video. And even a video like running a marathon while in VR showed considerable effort in planning and execution. But it is worth noting that in the Tesla autopilot video filmed in January of 2020, while Ryan and Haley had been confidently portraying relationship goals, we later found out that they had briefly taken a break in the relationship while in Chicago. As they tell it,
I was going through this weird existential crisis because we had been living in the house for like maybe 3 months, and I was like, what is going on? Like, I am 19 years old and I just bought a house with my boyfriend, and you know, maybe I should give up this serious adult life and just go be a teenager and maybe just go party with my friends.
Oh, that was
and
crazy.
Go travel the world without you.
the stresses of the past year had clearly accumulated in Haley's mind to the point where she seriously considered exiting the relationship to live as a typical 19-year-old. And while this argument seemed to last less than a day, it's worth noting that the doubt was present as recently as the beginning of this year. Which brings us to May 17th, 2020 in Big Bend National Park, the time and place that Ryan TRAHAN proposed to Haley PHAM. With the introduction of the Trey Family channel and consistent social media appearances with a circle of Christian friends, it was not so surprising that this move would come sooner rather than later. It was a spectacular event with stunning aerial drone footage, beautiful scenery, and even a commemorative song about their relationship.
I'll see you in Austin, please text when you live.
The engagement post got over 1 million likes on Instagram and broke the internet for the day. Reception was largely positive online, though there were pockets of negativity, particularly on Twitter, where the fallout from the Grease incident still hadn't been resolved. This prompted Ryan to write a response directed at the skeptics of their relationship, generally implying that those who judge have shortcomings themselves. This deflection strategy set the narrative for dealing with criticism of the relationship. In their minds, society has implicitly set parameters on life milestones, like when you should go to college, when you should get married and have kids, and where exiting the formal education system has been the most profitable decision they've made, it's not surprising that they're equally dismissive of the standard timeline of other life events. But their self-characterization as warriors against societal pressure is frankly intellectually dishonest. This will be discussed in section 6. Though the engagement brought a new wave of subscribers to their channels, the growth was short-lived, and viewership has dropped off a cliff in recent weeks. Haley's channel was flooded with wedding-related content and flaunting her new fiancé, notably in a barrage of insipid relationship Q&A videos. Ryan switched styles again to David Dobrik-inspired skit vlogs with his production team that lacked the authenticity of his 2017 Vlog Squad videos. While Carter was kind of a fun addition to the mix, it just wasn't as inspired as his previous content, and it reflected in the dwindling viewership. Ryan took a month-long break in posting this summer, his longest break in 3 years. But this lack of activity on their main channels was countered with a renewed focus on the Trey Family channel and a transition toward new business ventures beyond YouTube. Say goodbye to Ryan and Haley the YouTubers, and say hello to Ryan and Haley the real estate moguls. Yes, as of recording, Ryan and Haley have bought a rundown property in Texas and plan on building a house flipping brand based on their love of interior design. Haley's studying to get a real estate license as they admittedly attempt to follow in the footsteps of their idols Chip and Joanna Gaines.
It's Chip and Joanna Gaines back at it again.
They have no prior experience in real estate besides Haley's juvenile room decoration videos. I can't even pretend anymore. Thus begins the critical portion of this essay. What bothers me most about the Ryan and Haley story is that they present themselves as paragons of youth enterprise. They are relationship goals. They have it all figured out. That's why they're getting married so young and live in a beautiful mansion. To their audience, they're representative of maturity beyond their years, bulldozing the conventions of society one life milestone at a time. In their logical framework, criticism is futile because of relativistic arguments. Everyone is on their own path, so just because you might have been partying and nowhere near settling down at 20 years old doesn't mean they aren't.
I think
just ages in general are so weird because you can be like, oh, my 10-year-old cousin is so mature for her age. So it's like, what does that even mean? Because we already have these societal ideas of how a 10-year-old should act, how a 19-year-old should act, how a 21-year-old should act.
Like benchmarks.
And to an extent, they kind of have a point. But a sole reliance on relativistic arguments make distinction between truth and belief impossible. Could they make the same claims of maturity if they were 17 years old? How about 15 years old? At some point, they have to make the forward positive argument of why buying a house and getting married so young is rational. And in my opinion, these more direct justifications they attempt to use are totally lacking and contradictory to primary evidence from their content. We take the purchase of their house as the first example. I want to be unequivocally clear. Buying a house is a huge fucking responsibility, and not just because the upkeep of a property is a pain in the ass. Anytime you willingly put yourself into debt, and that is what a mortgage is, you need to be very confident that you have a path to pay off the debt, like Excel spreadsheet model levels of confidence. And this need only compounds as the debt increases. Buying a house and subsequently paying off a mortgage is a serious fiscal commitment, one that isn't conveyed in any of the house hunting videos from this period. This is concerning not only for the sake of Ryan and Haley's financial situation, but also because their young and impressionable audience is presented with an utterly irresponsible economic view of purchasing a house. The levity with which they treat their house hunting videos undercuts the reality that a lot of people spend years and years saving up for a down payment on a house, and that some people commit to a mortgage that they can't afford and subsequently get ass blasted with consequences like foreclosure, bankruptcy, and unrecoverable credit. Ryan and Haley, if you have made it this far in the video, if a financial professional encouraged you to make this purchase, you should fire them today. For the young people watching this who don't understand how purchasing a house works, I will explain the basics. For more information, you can check out Before you buy a house, you, possibly along with a significant other, will probably be renting an apartment of some kind. Let's say you're renting a one-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas. So on average, you're paying $1,300 per month in rent. You might also be paying utilities like electricity, heating, water, and internet, which together might be something like $250 per month in Austin. So every month you're spending around $1,500 to live in your apartment. After a while, you'll probably outgrow this living situation. Maybe you and your significant other want to start a family, maybe you just want more space, or maybe you heard that buying a house is a good investment, so you want to try it out. But when you look at houses, the prices are massive. Like, who has $300,000 to spend on a rundown house that needs a new roof? The answer is that most people don't have that kind of disposable income, so they borrow money to pay for a house with something called a mortgage. Basically, a mortgage is a loan specifically designed for real estate. So you go to a bank or a credit union or some other lender with a lot of money and say you want to buy a $300,000 starter house and you want to borrow money for it. Now, not everybody is able to do this, nor should they be allowed to. Obviously, the lender needs some kind of guarantee that you have the ability to pay them back. This guarantee usually takes the form of a credit approval or a check to make sure that you have paid back debts before in the past. In practice, this means that they want to make sure you pay off your credit card balance on time, if you have a student loan that you pay the monthly balance, or that any other debt payment or open line of credit, as they call it, is paid off in a timely manner. The lender is also going to want to make sure that you make enough money and that your stream of income is stable enough to pay off the debt. So they will ask to see tax returns going back a few years. But the lender won't just give you all the money to pay for the house. Usually they require you to pay a chunk of the cost of the house yourself, something called a down payment. Typical down payments are 20% of the cost of the home, but you can get away with lower sometimes. So on your $300,000 house, you pay a $60,000 down payment. You pay somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 on closing costs like paying lawyers and realtors, and now you owe the lender $240,000. You can't take forever to pay off the debt, so the lender will institute a term on the mortgage, typically either 15 or 30 years that you have to pay it off. Moreover, you don't just get to borrow money for free either, which is why you will pay interest on a mortgage. This interest is how the lender makes money. The rates change all the time, so on this imaginary loan, let's say your rate is 4% annual. The way that interest works is that the amount you owe on a loan goes up as time goes on. So if you have a $240,000 loan and a 4% annual rate and you don't pay down your debt for a year, at the end of the year, you would owe around $250,000 or an extra $10,000. Now, obviously you don't want this to happen, so you make monthly payments toward a mortgage. The way that the monthly payments are calculated is pretty mathematical, but the nice thing about them is that they're constant, so you pay the same amount every month. And there are great tools online to calculate how much you pay on your mortgage each month, depending on interest, loan amount, and term. This is called an amortization schedule, and I have one open here. So you can see on the loan we've been describing, you pay $1,145 each month. Now, every month, your monthly payment can be divided into principal and interest. The principal on a loan is the amount that you owe. You can see from the calculator that at the beginning of the loan, most of your payments are going toward interest and only like 30% of your monthly payment is going toward reducing the principal. But as time goes on and you pay down the principal more, the interest on the loan goes down too. So a larger proportion of your monthly payment gets funneled into the principal. And at the end of 30 years, congratulations, you paid off a loan. Now you can see at the top that over the 30 years, even though you owed $240,000, you paid an extra $170,000 in interest. That's a lot, but that's the cost of borrowing money. Now, when you pay off the loan, you own the house and you no longer owe the lender money. Your mortgage isn't the only cost associated with living in a house. Other monthly payments on top of the mortgage include property taxes, insurance, homeowner association fees, and extra utilities like sewage, water, and trash. So that $1,145 monthly payment might actually be closer to $2,000 with all of these factored in. Not to mention lawn care, one-time costs like furniture and repairs on things like plumbing, floors, and ceilings that you wouldn't be responsible for from just renting an apartment. But it's worth noting that there are tax benefits to home ownership. For example, interest payments and property taxes are deductible. Of course, you don't have to live in this $300,000 house for the 30-year duration of the loan. Let's say after 8 years, maybe you and your significant other have a few kids and you want a bigger space, or you want to move to a nicer part of town, so you set your sights on a nicer $500,000 house. If you want to take out a mortgage on this new house, you have to pay a down payment of around $100,000. But where do you get that money? You get the capital from two places: your savings and selling the home you're currently in. So let's say in the past 8 years, you put aside $50,000 for another down payment from a salary. And now the principal you owe on your original $240,000 loan went down to $200,000, as we can see in the amortization schedule. So you sell the house that you originally bought for $300,000 and hopefully it maintained its value or even appreciated. Let's say it sold for $360,000. You made some renovations and you picked a good neighborhood. Then from the sale, you take $200,000 and pay off the remainder of your old mortgage, and maybe $10,000 go into closing costs and other associated costs of selling a house. The $150,000 left over is called home equity, or the market value of your home minus any outstanding loans on the property. So now you have $50,000 in savings plus $150,000 in equity from selling the house. So you have $200,000 to put in as a down payment on the new house. So now you only borrow $300,000 from the lender for a new mortgage and you start the process again. Maybe this time you get a 15-year loan and your rate is like 3% now. This was an illustrative example of a strategy some people use to navigate the real estate market to give you a feel of the math behind buying and selling a home. The starter home strategy has some perks, the biggest one being that you are limiting the amount you're mortgaging at any given time, thus reducing interest. Also, if you have a good grasp on the market, you might be able to find a cheap home that has a good chance of appreciating, so you can build home equity by the time you're ready to sell. Some people, however, opt to continue renting until they build up enough savings to make a down payment on a forever home. Maybe starter homes in the area aren't nice enough, maybe the risk of dropping home prices is too much, or maybe their life circumstances are fluctuating too much and they're afraid of having to sell their putative starter home too soon, incurring capital gains taxes. These certainly aren't the only strategies people take, and all of this depends on the financial and life situation of the buyers. However, the one constant is that successful execution of any of these plans is the ability to pay off debts over a long period of time. The assessment of whether a home is a good investment or not is a very layered question that completely depends on the context of the purchase, the mortgage, and the individual home in question. This assessment requires an honest and unbiased accounting of your personal living tastes and projection of future tastes, a fair gauge of your future earnings, and if you're perceptive and or lucky, a discerning judgment of the market. When you're dealing with large sums of money, many times more than your net worth, it is imperative to operate with a logical plan and without emotion. Obviously, our hypothetical situation of a typical homeowner is a far cry from the financial bounty that Ryan and Haley find themselves with. Their case is very unusual for two reasons. First, they have a ton of liquidity or cash on hand at the time of purchase. It's impossible to really know how much their combined net worth was at the time of purchase, and differing estimations of their net worth make their decision to purchase the house puzzling in different ways. Online calculators of YouTube net worths are wildly inaccurate and don't incorporate brand deals and other sponsorships. In the following arguments, I will refer to 3 mutually exclusive assumptions: the low net assumption that their combined net worth was under $1 million at the time of purchase, the mid net assumption that their combined net worth was between $1 and $2 million at the time of purchase, and the high net assumption that their net worth was above $2 million at the time of purchase. If I had to guess, based on internal calculations, I would place their net worth in the ballpark of $1.2 million, but I'm not so confident, so it's worthwhile to consider other cases. I would find it very difficult to believe their net worth was over $2 million, but I'll consider that too. The second reason why Ryan and Haley are in a highly unorthodox home buying situation is that their income is totally unstable. Basically, all of their net worth was acquired in the year before purchasing a home.
All of our income is basically in the past year.
And no amount of hustle can change the inherent uncertainty of income from internet stardom. We can draw this conclusion even without the a posteriori knowledge that Ryan and Haley all but abandoned their main channels not a year later, thus illustrating the point. Their income across platforms and merch lines is ultimately based on their popularity, which, as we saw through the vagina waxing video and the grease incident, can rise and fall at the drop of a hat. All one needs to do is look at the graveyard of once popular YouTubers that have totally dropped off the map, whether from burnout, failure to adapt, or otherwise. Popular YouTubers with longevity are exceptions among the exceptions. Not to mention, YouTube as a platform is unpredictable. Advertising money on YouTube has become less profitable in recent years, and big shakeups like the adpocalypse in 2016 and fickle demonetizations and algorithm changes can royally fuck people over. Also, the landscape of the internet itself has high turnover. Just look at TikTok getting banned in multiple countries. And supplementary brand deals depend on this unstable popularity. All this to say that dependence on income from internet stardom is a bad bet, particularly for people who have no degrees or other job experiences to fall back on.
I could go get my degree if like YouTube explodes and dies, as well as every single business on planet Earth. If that happens, I could still go to college.
Now, some parameters we do know. Ryan and Haley purchased a $1.5 million house. They also mentioned they were not approved for a jumbo loan or a federally backed loan of more than $500,000 because they didn't have enough credit history, but that they did get approved for a certain loan.
So basically, Haley and I don't have enough credit history in order to get a jumbo loan.
So I didn't think we were gonna get pre-approved at all and that we would have to keep building our credit and stuff like that. So we did get pre-approved for a certain loan.
What this means, we have no idea. Perhaps they borrowed from someone outside the federally backed system through business connections, but assuming they were looking for something functioning similar to a jumbo loan, let's denote the big mortgage assumption as being in the ballpark of $1.2 million or the standard 20% down payment, and the small mortgage assumption being in the ballpark of the minimum $500,000 loan for a jumbo loan. Based on context clues, including their apparent lack of financial literacy when discussing other real estate related ventures, I would bet the big mortgage assumption is true, but for completeness, we can consider both. If they bought the house in September of 2019, rates on 30-year fixed were around 3.9%. So under the big mortgage assumption, with taxes and utilities included, I estimate they're paying ballpark $7,000 monthly to live in their house. Under the small mortgage assumption, this would be closer to around $4,000 monthly. However, if this was a private loan, chances are interest rates would actually be high. The only, and I mean the only, way that the house purchase makes even an ounce of sense is under the high net assumption and the small mortgage assumption. Otherwise, if their net worth is much larger than the value of the house and they paid a big chunk of it off. I think this case would show more financial guile than I'm ready to give them credit for. Here, the remaining liquidity would be enough to pay off the remainder of the mortgage if the income leveled off, and maybe the small loan on the house is necessary because they need more cash on hand for other business ventures and investments. Then the doubt of the purchase of the house basically reduces to the obvious red flag of being 20 years old buying a house with your 18-year-old girlfriend of less than a year. Otherwise, under the high net big mortgage assumptions, like what would you be doing paying that much on interest on a big mortgage when you could clearly afford to reduce the principal? It just doesn't add up. Again, these cases in my estimation are highly unlikely. Under the mid-net assumption, or the assumption that their net worth is close to the value of their home, I'm still struggling to find the logic behind the purchase. With the small mortgage assumption, which again I think is unlikely, They would be taking a massive chunk out of their liquidity that feels unnecessary while still paying interest on at least $500,000 mortgage. And the big mortgage assumption would be even worse since again they would be extending to make large interest payments without a stable income to facilitate such a large long-term loan. Of course, under the low net assumption, the small mortgage assumption is an impossibility, and the issues under the big mortgage assumption are only amplified. Ultimately, successful repayment of a mortgage on a $1.5 million house in their case depends on three things. One, a steady stream of income or less optimally adequate savings to make monthly payments. Two, non-decreasing house prices. And three, a long-term cooperative financial relationship between Ryan and Haley. We already discussed why relying on internet stardom for capital is a terrible bet. Forecasting whether the market will go up or down is not generally feasible. However, some indicators seem to suggest dropping housing prices over the next year. In their case, this would cause their equity to drop so that they would eat a loss if they sell the house, and if that putative loss is too big, then they're stuck paying interest on a mortgage they can't afford to get out of. And third, Ryan and Haley need to stay together financially in order to pay this off. Otherwise, they separately enter the low net assumption, which will basically make repayment an impossibility. If they separate, since both their names are on the loan, they would need to come to some kind of legal resolution, which is rarely mutual. I won't touch this assumption here as I will go into detail on their relationship in the following section, but suffice to say that both common wisdom on the calculus of young couples as well as Ryan and Haley's particular unsteady circumstances inform that betting on the lasting success of a young couple under financial duress is the worst bet of all. In short, mortgaging a $1.5 million house is overwhelmingly unnecessarily risky at their likely income and net worth. If they were truly set on buying a house, the financial strain from their position could have been almost entirely avoided if they just bought a cheaper house outright as a starter home. There are plenty of lovely, spacious $500,000 to $700,000 homes in their area that they could have paid for in cash. That way, a stable income wouldn't be a prerequisite for making mortgage payments since they wouldn't even have a mortgage, and any additional income could go right into their savings or other investments. And let's say they wanted to purchase the mansion down the line. With this option, if they just waited a few years for their income to stabilize, or even if they have a few other business ventures pop off, they could buy the new house from a much better financial position, not to mention that they would grow into the space naturally. And they talk about how this was their initial thought too.
At first we were gonna get a sort of starter house, you know, like who knows how long we'd live in it, maybe a few years.
So, assuming Ryan and Haley are rational agents, they must have really strong reasons to want this $1.5 million house that outweigh the risk they're taking on. Well, in their words, here's why they bought the house.
We have been apartment living for not even a year, and I'm just gonna be honest with you guys, we really dislike apartment living a lot. We don't live in the same apartment, we've never lived together, but it's house time. We're done. We're done with the apartment, and if you want to get technical, it's a much better investment to buy a house rather than just keep paying a random person rent.
And we have a 3-year-old son,
yeah,
and he needs a backyard.
Yeah, he's really, every day he asks me if he can get a backyard for his birthday, and it's really heartbreaking for me every time that I tell him that our lease is not up yet. So
look at him, he's crying.
And it's just a really good investment because as of now, we're renting in a place that we don't love.
It's very expensive here as well.
Overpriced. And
I think we're gonna be saving money by having a mortgage.
Yeah, that's a thing
crazy.
that is, I don't know how much you guys know about the whole thing because, I mean, it's just...
We're still learning too.
Yeah, we're obviously still learning, but it's a great time to buy, especially in the area that we live in, and it's a really good investment, and honestly, something that just so many pros rather than living at this apartment. So obviously, other than this just being a great place to make bigger and better videos, it's also just a really good investment for us at this point in time in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, we were like renting a super expensive apartment for what we were getting. I don't know, there's just like something to be said about having space in a backyard. Basically, like apartment living for us has just been pretty unreasonably priced. I think that's most apartments throughout the world.
Considering also the space, because we don't just leave for work and then only sleep at our apartments, it was like, we were there 24/7.
Yeah.
So this was just the best thing for us at this moment.
Yeah.
This house was by far the best for accommodating people, which is why we wanted a house in the first place. We wanted a house because it's basically our set for videos. It's gonna be an open door for friends and family to stay with us all the time, even for some to live with us. That'll be another video. There's even a room for Spock. I mean, like, it was just the most accommodating house. It's just perfect. Do you think we want a pool?
Yeah. Okay, Haley, what are your pros and cons of this place?
The lighting is bad, and there's carpet, and then the stairs are ugly.
Yeah, I think both of us want a bigger backyard because we want a pool, and obviously didn't have a pool, which that's gonna be a lot of money. But also, yeah, Spock needs space. We need space to like film videos.
Most people go to their jobs, and then when they come home, they have a few hours at home, they sleep, they wake up, they have the weekends at their house. But with the type of work that we do, our houses are not only our living spaces, our entertaining spaces, but they're also where we work out of. So it's also our workplace and our studio. So you have to consider not only our bedroom and a guest room, but also our 2 offices and then a filming room and all the room to just like have fun and make the types of videos we need to make, and like a backyard for that, because that was something really limiting about an apartment, was just space to make the types of videos Ryan wanted to make. He wanted to like shoot his flame.
I was always embarrassed to have friends over because everyone else seemed to have really nice houses. And I know it's like, it sounds like a very ungrateful thing to say, but the reality is when you're growing up, you compare yourself to everyone else. And I would see my friends' houses and they'd be like really nice, or at least like, I don't know, inviting or something that I want to go to. And I guess my house, I literally never had friends over. And my dad would say the same. My dad raised me on his own, by the way. Like he didn't want to have friends over. And it's just like, we did the best we could. But that was just like the situation we had growing up. So I want you guys to know how selfless and humble Haley is. And she doesn't talk about it. And she really does deserve a house as beautiful, because she worked hard for it. Obviously in life, like typically you work hard and you get what you earn. So
I've been watching YouTube probably since I was 9 years old. I was obsessed with these YouTubers. I have followed some of these YouTubers live since they had like 200,000 subscribers to when they have 8 million subscribers. They're buying houses, they're buying their parents' houses, and I always watched that, and I always thought it was so inspiring. Like, never believe anything is too good for you.
Okay, so in case you missed it, these reasons were: 1, they were sick of apartment living; 2, a house is a better investment; 3, they want to give Spock a backyard; 4, space for entertaining guests; 5, a pool; 6, good lighting; 7, space to film videos; and 8, they have an emotional connection to nice houses / they deserve it. Let's go through each of these. You know, I really don't have a problem with this one because they have the capital to comfortably leave the renting situation. I think even a small mortgage for a young couple would be too big a responsibility in comparison to a relatively low-risk shared renting environment. But if they bought a cheaper home in cash and had plenty of liquidity left over, I don't see the big deal with changing your living situation to fit your growing tastes. No, 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 no. You can't just say that a house is a better investment than renting, full stop. And you can't expect me to believe that your massive mortgage is a universally good investment. You have to qualify that shit. And Ryan saying they'll actually save money on the mortgage rather than 2 rents, well, by my calculation, at the beginning of the loan, only $1,700 is going into home equity. So the remaining $5,300 on the monthly payment is going down the proverbial drain. There's no way possible that you could rent 2 2-bedroom apartments in Austin, Texas, and have a combined rent and utilities even close to $5,300. My guess based on the market is that they're both paying a combined $4,500 on rent and utilities when they were apartment living before buying the house. So yeah, I call bullshit on the mortgage being cheaper. Furthermore, why would you even want to be close to that level of spending when you literally could have dropped monthly payments on a property to like ballpark $1,000 just through property taxes and utilities if you didn't have a mortgage? Literally makes no sense. I can't tell if this is sarcastic or not, I really can't. In the event that it isn't, the smallest dog in the world definitely does not need a massive backyard. I mean, maybe you want one for yourself, but your dog certainly doesn't need it. And if you were joking, I guess I got trolled then, fair play. I really don't understand how many guests you plan on hosting at a time, but based on your small social circle and videos that I've seen of you hosting guests, it has to be less than 20, and you certainly don't need a compound to do that. Pools are kind of a hassle in my opinion, but that's just me. If you really wanted one, there are plenty of cheaper houses that have them. This could be the most ignorant demand of all. You don't need natural lighting to take Instagram pictures or shoot videos. Just get some fixtures. Holy shit, it's not that hard. And I should mention that they judged several of the houses on a bunch of adjustable cosmetic features like chandeliers and wood finishes. Kind of reveals a lack of experience. Okay, this is a horrendous reason. Their YouTube channels flourished when they lived in small apartment spaces. Like, Ryan got famous by just talking into his computer and maintained a huge audience with that formula. Haley too got popular from shaving her vagina in a bathtub. Their popularity stems from their personality, not from their production value or flex sensibilities. So if they're going into debt to live in a nicer space to improve their videos, you'd expect some sort of return on investment, right? Like literal calculations on tax savings from declaring your home as a workspace and estimates on how many extra views filming in this spacious kitchen will get over filming in an apartment. Not only is that a mathematical reach to say the least, the ROI straight up just didn't happen. Look at all the videos they filmed outside, on road trips, and just in their rooms. Really, if we're talking from a financial standpoint, this is verifiably the worst reason of them all. And here we can see that Ryan and Haley clearly both have an emotional investment in having a nice house. And this is what indicates to me that they lack the experience to make a well-informed investment. A key rule of finance is that you never operate with emotion or fear. Concepts like deserving things need to get thrown out the fucking window. It's cold, but it's reality. It does not serve you to go into debt to buy things just because you want them. And I think this is the crux of why the house purchase was such a bad decision. The house purchase became the financial arm of Ryan and Haley's culture war against the implicit societal timeline. Because what better way to prove you're a mature adult than to get a mortgage on a forever home like real adults do? It's unfortunate that Ryan and Haley not only lack the supervision that most kids their age have, but they also have the funds to act on their misguided impulses. Seriously, you don't get extra maturity points to put in the maturity bank just because you buy a house. And when Ryan says,
Haley and I are fortunately like financially in a mature place, I would say, you know.
No. You have money now, but that doesn't make you mature financially, and it certainly doesn't make you sustainably wealthy, especially if you blow it on a massive mortgage you can't afford and don't need. While I only focused on the financial stressor of having a mortgage on a $1.5 million mansion, let's not forget this situation is exacerbated by Haley's purchase of a condo for her mom and that they've unofficially abandoned their primary YouTube channels, their main source of internet visibility, to start a new house flipping business venture at which they have no prior experience. It's one thing for your ability to pay your mortgage to hinge on an uncertain income, but it's a totally different issue for your mortgage payments to depend on success at a new business you've never tried. And a question on the Trey family house flipping direction while we're at it. Who is the target audience for this? You've admitted that you prioritize the brand over making profit on your first few house sales.
But at this point, we're willing to just break even, just walk away
it's your first one,
with $0 because that's the whole start of the brand. If we're going to have a brand surrounded about home living and spaces, well, we need to be practicing.
You need to prove that you're practicing what you're preaching, you know?
Exactly.
But who are you selling this brand to? What adults are going to be interested in your sophomoric room decorations when they could just watch actual professionals like Chip and Joanna? Is it your dwindling audience of teenage girls that are going to watch your content? Because looking at Trey family views, there was a huge dip for the fixer-upper content that only got resolved when you started doing wedding content again. And if you're going into Airbnb rentals, then you're gonna have to contend with other issues too, like unpredictable COVID travel restrictions and the fact that your young audience doesn't have the same purchasing power for vacation destinations that they did for small ticket items like sweatshirts and water bottles. This whole thing has echoes of the Retro Reprise debacle, where Haley relied too much on her own vision without consulting the taste of her audience. With the way that the culture is moving, they could potentially be facing some serious blowback and an unintentional branding as entitled rich kids entering the real estate market at a time when millions of Americans are out of work and can't pay their rent or mortgage. Their only hope is that Ryan sold enough Tesla stock to finance this real estate expedition as a fun couples task independent of profits they may not. And now we come to the emotional center of the video. Where assessing the prudence of a financial decision is mathematically justifiable, judging the maturity of a relationship is comparatively nebulous. And this was a challenge that I took very personally. Anytime you publicly speak negatively about someone's way of life, you invite equal and opposite criticism on your own. Making value judgments on Ryan and Haley's potential marriage prompted me to evaluate my own relationships and my own views on marriage. As I've alluded to several times in this video, the crux of Ryan and Haley's relationship logic is a persecution complex against a society that unfairly judges young married couples.
Society just puts
this timeline on all of us to follow. It's kind of an unspoken timeline, but you know, it's like you need to move out by 18, you need to go to college, by 22 you need to be graduated, then by 23 you better have a stable paying job, then around 24 to 26 you better get married, around then maybe have a baby. That's not a timeline for everyone. We don't all have to follow that. So, you know, people used to get married back in the day at the age of 13, have a kid by age 14, and that just goes to show that society changes and so does people's timelines and what people think is normal, what's not. If someone wants to get married when they're 17, you don't know their circumstance, you know? Everyone's circumstances are different.
So before I continue with the specifics of Ryan and Haley's relationship, I had to self-interrogate my own biases toward young marriage. And to be honest, I do have some general issues with teenage marriage, particularly those with a short premarital dating period. I'll run down the list. Your personality and brain chemistry will significantly change in your 20s, and there's no guarantee that you and your partner's personalities will grow together. Not to mention that a marriage benefits from a stable shared vision of the future that you likely don't have and probably shouldn't have at that age. Divorce rates are significantly higher in teen and early 20s marriages versus mid to late 20s marriages. You don't have enough adult relationship experience to spot red flags like abusive tendencies. You're probably running off a high from being in the early stages of a relationship, thus clouding your judgment, and that feeling is basically guaranteed to wear off in a few years. And being married puts so much more pressure on the young relationship than is necessary. The majority of these issues can be resolved by just waiting 3 to 5 years to become more mature and to have a more informed understanding of the relationship if it lasts. To me, those 3 to 5 years of not being married feels like an extremely small price to pay to get clarity on a lifetime commitment. But this isn't to say uniformly that all young marriages are rushed and ill-advised, or even that rushed marriages have no chance of growing into functional relationships. It depends on the couple and their maturity and preparation for a lifetime commitment. Assessing one's level of maturity in relation to young marriage is subjective, but I think Socrates gives us some guidance here.
Mankind is made of two kinds of people: wise people who know they are fools, and fools who think they are wise.
If you are a young person going into marriage and you can comfortably acknowledge your own shortcomings and the typical roadblocks in a young marriage, I believe that is a mark of maturity. And if we're assessing the space of young married Christian vloggers, I think there are some positive standouts of couples who well represent the gravity of a lifetime commitment. In particular, Kaylin and Kyra from the Edwards family. You might remember them for their brazen prank content in 2016 and their aggressive clickbait titles and thumbnails. But they actually now put out well-rounded family content on things like budgeting, childcare, and faith. In their Q&As, they exude a realism that Ryan and Haley completely lack. Take a look at this.
The hardest thing about being married at 19 is you don't know who you are. So to commit yourself to someone in that covenant of marriage, like we said, we do value the sanctity of marriage, and it actually is a marriage covenant between us and God, and you don't really know yourself. So it's like, how can you give your total self to someone if you don't even know who you are? But that's the beauty of young marriage, and that's one of the things that Kyra and I like, is the fact that we don't know who we are. We admit that we're still trying to figure out who we are, but the fact that we get to do that together is incredible.
Or on religion, something like this.
I do understand kind of the whole stigma that Christian couples can have, because I do think, a lot of people act fake, and they act like they're just doing better than they are. They act like they're perfect, act like they never have any issues, they've never done any wrong ever since they got saved. However, those people get exposed. So it's better to just be yourself, have integrity, show yourself for who you are. That way you can live freely and open up, and you don't have to worry about being exposed.
Seriously, after being down the Trey family bizarro world rabbit hole, hearing these actual adult perspectives is so refreshing.
Obviously everyone's gonna have an opinion, but sometimes those opinions can be valid.
Yes.
Like, you should not just completely block out everything everyone's saying.
I mean, there are certain characteristics that I didn't even notice in myself that no one was confronting me about in real life that people in YouTube comments would notice.
Random people on the internet who stumble across its opinions doesn't bother me. I think if it was like my best friend or my mom or my dad who actually knows me, if they were concerned, I think that's a red flag, because they actually know us as human beings and they've seen our relationship. People who don't know us and don't know our relationship, kind of an irrelevant opinion.
Absolutely.
An opinion that they are entitled to nonetheless, but not one that's very valid. We do value the opinions of our family and friends. But internet humans, not as much. You know?
Which leads me to the conclusion that the problem is not with young marriage in general, but the particular brand of immaturity that Ryan and Haley exhibit. So once you move past the relativistic non-answers that Ryan and Haley give about their logic behind getting married, the justification goes something like this. They've already bought a house and started building their life together, so why not seal the deal and go all in?
You know, they just told me, like, dude, you got the house with her. Obviously, you guys are a lot more mature than most kids your age. You guys aren't going to be going to school. You're not going to have any crazy life changes in the next few years. Like, you guys are essentially settled down. What are you waiting for?
We already have a house together. Like, even that part's like a little flip-flopped already. So it's like, I already have this commitment with you. Why would I not make this other commitment with you when we want that for our lives?
Right.
We really already have a house together, and we are already building this life together, and there's nothing more than I want to solidify that and fully commit to that, and just, I want him to be my husband, you know? Like,
I mean, I think it's funny because we already have these like huge commitments that would be scary as just like boyfriend and girlfriend.
Oh,
like, that's kind of crazy, honestly.
Like, you
like,
guys know.
But we already know mentally. Like, I knew that he wasn't going to just like leave and like we would have built this whole life together and then it would have crumbled. So it only makes sense that we solidify it under God.
This is such a backwards argument because the house purchase was also an irrationally risky decision. If anything, I would think you would want to hedge the risk by being more conservative with your marriage timeline. And even the supposed career stability of their adult life is a lie.
It's not like we have any crazy life events, like we're not going to be pivoting.
Because they basically have abandoned their YouTube channels to pursue a completely new house flipping venture. But their reasoning implies an even more perilous assumption that because they have a house, a dog, and investments together, they somehow have the emotional maturity of typical 30-year-olds who are also in a similar lifestyle.
We kind of just skipped like a super large chunk of those years. Like, that would probably take about 4 years of college and then maybe a year or two of getting a job and getting settled in and maybe like buying your first place. So we skipped like 6 years of that. And so obviously we are super young because we skipped so many steps.
We're just like years ahead in terms of just like kind of laying a foundation. We have a house together. We have a dog together. We are pretty much settled in to like what our life is going to be. And we're ready to build our life together. Obviously, you guys are a lot more mature than most kids your age.
And this is just patently false. Newsflash, you can't buy your way past the mental maturation process in your 20s, and getting married so soon isn't going to expedite the process either. All across their videos, there are clear indicators that Ryan and Haley's relationship is not the adult affair they advertise it to be. I think most obvious is their lack of relationship experience. Not to say that it's necessary to date X number of people before you settle down on a life partner. You can get relationship experience even from continuing to date the same person. Haley is Ryan's first girlfriend, and Ryan is Haley's first serious relationship. Haley asserts that her high school dating experience gives her perspective on being able to assess a healthy relationship.
Because you don't have anything to go off of, but I know for sure this is like a really good relationship. But I was very surprised at how comfortable you were as a man being so nice and gentle to people, because I feel like growing up at my high school, all of the guys just act like typical guys who have to be over masculine and can't show you kindness because they're a man. And so for you to be so outgoing and so kind to everyone was, number one, shocking to me. And then
yeah, no shit you like Ryan compared to the idiot guys in your high school. Idiot guys in high school set an astoundingly low bar for a relationship. And conversely, Ryan has no bar to set. All of these things that you contend make your relationship special, that you've talked about marriage on your first date, that you're waiting until marriage to have sex, that you've felt so solid for the past 2 months.
But within the past 2 to 3 months, it's just the most solid our relationship has ever been. And even if we had 0.5% of a doubt, now we have 0% doubt.
Are not special at all. Hate to break it to you, but you guys are just like every other overeager Christian couple who thinks they're gonna get married in the early days of their first serious relationship. While Haley feels the brunt of online judgment mostly because of past transgressions, but also because of her specific brand of annoyance, I think it's unfortunate that Ryan tends to get a free pass when it comes to the relationship, because a lot of his behavior shows classic signs of love bombing. If you're unfamiliar, love bombing is a manipulation tactic in which the love bomber will shower the love bombee with affection, gifts, and promises for the future as a form of control and conditioning. It doesn't necessarily take a consciously controlling person to do this either. A lot of times it can be just plain immature people who don't have a healthy model of a romantic relationship. There's no bigger example of this than Ryan giving Haley a glass vial with a proposal note 2 months into their relationship. I think as a society we tend to fetishize young, fast love and view quick commitments as indicators of true feelings, when in reality these ideas are unrealistic and even harmful. For Ryan to express interest in a lifelong commitment as early as 2 months in, beyond the typical lovey-dovey daydreaming, is a red flag.
So like 3 months into dating we knew.
You can't know someone well enough in 2 months to know you can spend a lifetime with them. And like I said, I don't think this was intentional manipulation. I just think you can't really know how serious of an undertaking marriage is if you've only been in a romantic relationship for 2 months. There are other signs too, like Ryan's response to Haley's existential crisis in Chicago when she thought about leaving him to just be a normal teenager.
One thing I wanted to be sure of is that Haley isn't making these memories that she looks back on and then I'm not in them.
Yeah,
one of the most fundamental things in having a long relationship that is happy and has longevity is building a life with the other person. It's not about like, all right, I'm attracted to you, we'll get married, you know. It's literally about building your life with the other person. And like, that means having common goals and having common routines and relationships in a common circle. And otherwise, you're not gonna understand the other person. And obviously, that's gonna lead to either a lack of communication or a lack of like happiness. So,
but even in marriage, it's not healthy to expect a codependent union like what Ryan is describing. Parties in a relationship need to have autonomy and a certain level of independence, particularly in the early stages. Otherwise, you're forcing a codependent environment that only creates stress. What he's talking about sounds like someone who's never been in a relationship reading a Marriage for Dummies book and skipping ahead to chapter 9. It takes time to integrate your life so strongly with another person. It's not an instantaneous choice that gets made in a single day or after a fight. It's a patient culmination of years of spending time together, and there's no shortcut. Even the proposal video is an example of a love bomb. Like, yeah, Ryan and Haley are big time YouTubers and it kind of makes sense to document a major life event in a big time way. But could you imagine how much expectation that would put on your relationship to maintain a public impression of the perfect young love? If the relationship was toxic behind the scenes, it would be so much harder to exit. It might not be entirely fair to portray Ryan as the driving force behind these swift major relationship steps, but he certainly is enabling them. One of the central pillars to the relationship logic of Ryan and Haley is this idea that the life they have built in the past 2 years together is a foundation for forever. But both Ryan and Haley have exhibited public identity crises both in their content and in their personal lives. For Haley, this stems back from dropping out of high school and losing her dancing identity, as well as her friends, and being thrust into the position of breadwinner for her mom. But it extends well beyond to her personality shift in 2019, the trauma from the Grease video, the failure of Retro Reprise, her existential crisis in Chicago where she literally left the relationship, to her recent sharp left turn to Joanna Gaines Jr. And even for Ryan, as we've recently found out, the content shifts that he ostensibly so confidently pulled off actually took a huge toll on his sense of self and even led to depression in his words. And it's not a stretch to think that this period of depression in July of 2019 was deliberately followed by the genesis of the Trey family channel and the subsequent house search in the following month. And even presently, a recent loss of interest in their YouTube content has precipitated a near complete career change. Not to say that these questions of identity exacerbated by internet fame mean that Ryan and Haley are inherently unstable people, but they're emotionally unstable right now in their late teens and early 20s, like everyone else is at that age. Not only that, but just listen to the difference between how anguished and disoriented Ryan feels about his content shifts versus how dismissive Haley is about it.
I totally shifted my identity from commentary to viral videos because I wasn't satisfied. I totally shifted my identity again from viral videos to these vlog videos, and I'm still not satisfied. And I can't emotionally take another shift, another identity change, pivot shift, whatever you want to call it, without talking to you guys.
Ryan on his channel was doing a lot of things. He went through a phase where he was making viral content, and then he went to more vloggy, skit-based things, and I feel like that one got kind of burnt out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Ryan and Haley are both seeking a deeper meaning in life, and by my estimation, they are rushing into a marriage in order to satiate a thirst for the next big thing. What makes this situation even more precarious is how they have expressed divorce is not an option.
And we literally don't even see divorce as an option. What would it take for you to divorce me, basically? Like, what would be the thing that you would, you know, what's the deal breaker for you? And we both put none, other than like if you literally became a murderer. So
yeah.
Hate to break it to you, but just because you are Christian doesn't preclude you from getting a divorce. Just ask your parents. And your odds are looking pretty high because you're so young. Nobody goes into a marriage thinking a divorce is going to happen to them. And while generally upholding the sanctity of marriage is good in theory, you have to understand that divorce is the healthy option in so many cases of relationship breakdowns. Like, what happens if the relationship becomes emotionally and physically abusive? How does it help anyone to stay in that environment? Moreover, would you want to bring a child into that environment? What if you're just plain unhappy in the relationship and no amount of counseling or prayer can help? You're not immune from these breakdowns just because you don't believe in divorce. And if anything, I would think that you would want to proceed so much more cautiously instead of rushing into a binding relationship with someone you hardly know. Not only is it a sign of ignorance and inexperience to have such an idealistic view of marriage, but it's an irresponsible view to push a young audience. It's worth noting that in their Q&A videos, Ryan and Haley refer to two recurring arguments in their relationship. One is about Haley's incessant need for reciprocity. As she describes it,
I don't think you do this, but I do this, where I would be kind of like tallying, oh, like I'm gonna sacrifice my work to go and help you with your video, but like there's one thing I did for you and like let's see what he's gonna do for me. Like we would do a lot of video shoots for you, and I would always just be tallying in my mind hours spent for Ryan's channel versus for mine.
This is no small thing, and based on how many times it gets brought up in their videos, one can only assume it's an ongoing issue. Ryan describes finding solace and opportunities to build character by picking up Haley's chores.
Either you take personal responsibility and do the dishes no matter what. Honestly, I found the most freedom and like liberation in that. If the dishes are in the sink, I want to do them, and I feel like that's an opportunity for me to build my character.
But that doesn't describe a partnership whatsoever, and after a year of marriage, building your character is going to get pretty old. I don't think this makes Haley a bad person, I just think it shows a lack of experience, and if it took you a year of being in a relationship to identify this as a problem, there's no way that you're prepared to accept an engagement only a few months later. A second recurring issue in their content deals with PDA. Where Ryan is more comfortable being physically affectionate in public, Haley describes social anxiety in these situations, leading to multiple disagreements.
PDA versus social anxiety. So in public, Ryan doesn't fear anything. Whereas when I'm in public, I'm constantly thinking about other people, if they're looking at me. I hate if people look at me in public. Like that's why I'm scared to wear outfits in public, because people will look at you harder. And so he would be, you know, hugging me or just being cutesy and romantic. Oh, yeah. And I would just pull away super harshly, because to me, I'm like, that is going to draw attention.
And so if I go to reach for her hand and she like jerks it away, I'm like, oh, what's going on? Right, yeah. So I feel like one thing that is like a trigger for me is rejection. And so if Haley does this, it doesn't matter what environment we're in. Like if you just jerk your hand away from me, or if I like go to hug you and you push me away, it's like literally the most hurtful, deteriorating thing I could possibly experience coming from the person I love. And so that's always been a really tough thing for me with Haley.
Even in their videos, you can sense a tension in the way they interact.
Which is not normal. Okay.
You can't help it.
You tricked me.
This isn't an issue where one person is right and the other is wrong. Everyone has individual preferences in the way they give and receive affection. And in a functioning relationship, these differences need to be accounted for and respected, because at the end of the day, how we love is foundational to a romantic union. And if PDA is such a contentious topic, then the outlook on a new postmarital sexual relationship does not look too promising. Now, I'm aware that the optics of a 45-year-old man lecturing a 19-year-old girl on sex is not great. However, Haley has spread so much toxicity and plain ignorance about sex on her young fan base, someone has to correct the record and offer an adult perspective. If you've watched Haley's content for a while, especially her recent videos, you'll know that she is a devout Christian and promotes abstinence before marriage. This in itself is not a problem. In fact, there are many good reasons to motivate underage teenagers to wait a while to have sex. De-emphasis on sex in a young hormonal relationship can encourage other facets of the relationship to develop, such as communication and conflict resolution, emotional connections, shared long-term visions of the future, etc. Not to mention that young sexual relationships can often be exploitative, with inexperienced parties lacking the emotional fortitude and sense of self to reject overbearing advances from their partner. That's why we have age of consent laws to protect minors from these lopsided relationships. The important thing is that we can give concrete logical reasons for teenagers to postpone sexual relations independent of religious dogma. Rationalizations that educate and empower rather than shame. But this is not the path that Haley chooses. Instead, she espouses the purity doctrine, or that one is only pure if they wait until marriage to have sex.
I'm just trying to stay pure and...
This is problematic for so many reasons. First, for all of the relativistic posturing that Ryan and Haley engage in, suggesting that no one rulebook is appropriate to judge everyone's path through life, it's awfully hypocritical, not to mention ignorant and hurtful, to impose that the arbitrary condition of sex before marriage makes one less pure. The way that this attitude is hedged to be more inclusive is by the party line, "God forgives you."
I just always fear that someone's listening to this conversation and they are born again and they're like recommitting themselves to waiting till marriage, and I don't want these conversations to make you feel guilty. Like, never. You have no reason to feel guilty. Like, Jesus literally took that so that we don't have to bear that.
I've had multiple friends that have decided they had sex and they decided to wait. They were like, okay, whoever else I date, whatever, like, I'm not having sex again until I'm married. And I just want you to know, like, I've met quite a few people like that, and that is okay, and like, you are still loved by, you know, us, God, and you are totally forgiven. And
That's so condescending. Imagine being a 19-year-old virgin telling a 35-year-old unmarried atheist woman in a consensual sexual relationship that God forgives you. Imagine telling a 14-year-old from your teenage audience whose older boyfriend pressured her into sex that God forgives you. Imagine telling a survivor of sexual assault that God forgives you. If you have never had sex, if you literally cannot even say the word sex, penis, or vagina out loud without being embarrassed, you are in no place to lecture an audience about sexual philosophies.
Are you nervous about your wedding night?
Nervous about what?
I mean, I don't know what they could possibly be talking about.
We're getting a coffee bar, so I'm chilling.
No, your wedding night after the wedding.
Can't believe it. I'm in utter disbelief right now.
I'm more of the man than you are.
Haley. Ow.
I did not even hit you. Ryan, are you nervous for the wedding night?
I'm not nervous.
I think girls have more to be nervous about because you know why.
And I think this highlights one of the issues with the precepts of Christian fundamentalism, that pre-marriage abstinence is stressed so much as to relegate post-marital sexual health as an afterthought. So somehow after you've mentally diagnosed your natural desires as sins to be avoided and defined your self-worth by your virginity, once you get married, you'll have no issues flipping the switch and having unencumbered sex with your spouse. Or worse yet, that sex is an unalienable reward for abstaining until marriage. It just doesn't work like that. For inexperienced couples, sexual intercourse takes communication, emotional and physical comfort with yourself and your partner, and most importantly, practice. The way that Haley builds up this fantasy of losing her virginity in the Pinterest perfect Maldives in a burst of godly love.
But I just don't want to lose my virginity until I'm literally in the Maldives. So I've had this vision for so long that I need to, you know, fulfill this vision in my head.
Sorry girl, but you are in for a hella disappointment. Please read first-hand accounts of Christian women losing their virginity to get some realistic expectations instead of deluding yourself and your followers. And let's not forget about that time a listener to the Call Me Candid podcast sent in a question about how to deal with peer pressure of all her friends at school choosing to have sex before marriage. Here was Haley's advice.
I would highly recommend trying to find a Bible study or even something online. Like, I have a Facebook group full of Christians who talk about stuff like that. They talk about hard things, and just try to find people who are doing the same thing as you. You can even tell your friends, like, hey, I'm waiting till marriage, so can you not talk about those things in front of me?
Holy shit. So your advice is to subdue sexual feeling completely to the point of alienating her friends and to join secular social groups where everyone is just as sexually repressed. If by chance the girl who wrote this letter is listening to this video right now, this is terrible advice. There's a whole world of human sexual experience beyond the narrow scope of Southern Christian doctrine. My advice, if this is a serious concern of yours, talk to people about sex and educate yourself. Talk to your parents about their experiences. Talk to your guidance counselor about outcomes of high school students that engage in sex. Ask your doctor about how to protect yourself from STDs and unwanted pregnancies. Talk to your friends about their early sexual experiences and how they feel it affected their relationships. If you have older siblings or friends, ask about how they feel about the high school sexual zeitgeist and how it changes with age. Read the sex chapter in your Campbell biology textbook and learn how reproduction varies across species. Read about what the famous philosophers and religious leaders in the Western Hemisphere thought of the ethics of sex, and then read about what the Confucians and the Taoists believe in. Learn about the historical and cultural perspectives of sex, and then look at viewpoints outside the heteronormative sphere. Knowledge is power. Your research will demystify sex and make you realize that those sexual urges you have been experienced by just about everyone everywhere all throughout history, and that it's nothing to be ashamed of. And chances are along the way you'll figure out that having sex in high school probably isn't worth it, but at the very least you'll be aware of how to be safe and may even be able to help your friends through their own relationships rather than isolating yourself. And this brings us to arguably the most damaging content that Haley has put out, this being her stance on birth control. This was a 3-episode arc where Haley asked her followers what type of birth control she should use, settled on the patch without consulting a gynecologist, got nausea, and after 3 days gave up and began singing praises of the natural method. She went into some detail of this experience on a now deleted Call Me Candid podcast episode.
This week, I tried the patch. And
tell them how you got this too. This is what I find interesting.
Yeah, so there's an online method to get it where like you have an interview with a doctor over the computer.
That's so
and
crazy.
They send the prescription to your local CVS or whatever it is, and you just pick it up. And because of everything going on, like I just didn't really want to go to the doctor's office.
No.
And I mean, just in general, I don't want to go to the doctor's office, so I did it over the phone. And they did the patch for me because that's what I went into like asking them for basically, because I have a friend who has the patch and she was like, oh yeah, I had no side effects, like it's great for me. And apparently the patch has a lot of milligrams or whatever the dosage is. Like it's just kind of a higher dosage. And
so is there a standard dosage for the
no,
patch?
I tried to look it up of like what's a low dosage, what's a high dosage, and I didn't get many clear answers. So I still don't know like where the patch lies in that or like what they gave me. But I've never been on any sort of substance like that. I'm making it sound like a drug, which I guess it is.
It is.
But yeah, I've never done something like that. And I'm also like 5 feet tall. And so I think my body was just so shocked. And it's just so weird. You can like it looks like a Band-Aid. And then I put it on when I started my period on Sunday. And literally the next morning, I work out and I threw up after like 3 times. I felt so nauseous and so gross. And like, ugh.
There are very few universal values you can prescribe to sex. People across different cultures have such a variety of reasons for engaging in the behaviors they do. However, I feel confident in making this one definitive declaration. If you are not mature enough to properly research birth control and you are not ready to raise a child, then you are not mature enough to have sex. Let me repeat. If you are not mature enough to research birth control and you are not ready to raise a child, then you are not mature enough to have sex. And if marriage is a necessary and sufficient condition to begin having sex, then you're probably not mature enough to get married either. If you're a young girl listening to this and you want to try birth control, please consult your gynecologist first before taking hormonal medications. A doctor will be able to give you dosage recommendations based on your medical history and lab tests. So let's break this down. Haley claims she didn't go to the doctor because of COVID fears.
Because of everything going on, like I just didn't really want to go to the doctor's office.
Which is bullshit, right? Like she's visiting wedding venues without a mask and having large social gatherings with her friends. Then she gets the patch from an online vendor based on a personal recommendation, not from a medical opinion.
I am trying the patch. I did my research on what I wanted to try, and one of my friends tried the patch and I talked to her about her experience, so that's what I'm going to try. But
after 3 days of nausea and fatigue, she rips the patch off.
The patch has a lot of milligrams or whatever the dosage is. Like it's just kind of a higher dosage. And
so is there a standard dosage for the
No,
patch?
I tried to look it up of like what's a low dosage, what's a high dosage, and I didn't get many clear answers. So I still don't know like where the patch lies in that or like what they gave me.
Like no shit your body had such a strong reaction. You didn't even dose yourself. Maybe if you had gone to a doctor, And the whole point of birth control is that it's a long-term treatment. So you can't even say that the patch didn't work for you because you only used it for 3 days. But it only gets worse. Haley plugs the YouTube comments of her birth control vlog as a resource for her audience, which is obviously irresponsible beyond belief.
This is not even to plug my own video, but like it literally is a resource because I did a video called How I've Been Preparing for the Wedding or something, and that's when I get the birth control. And I asked people about their experiences, and the comments are just filled with paragraphs of different people's experiences if you want to read.
Yeah, you guys should. That's smart.
It's kind of like a personal forum. And
please do not do this and consult a doctor instead. And then she confuses the IUD with the implant.
a lot of people were recommending the IUD, which is the metal rod you get in your arm.
But worse yet, Haley then starts educating her audience on the natural method, or natural family planning.
It should be very hard to get pregnant. But then I heard
watch you get pregnant.
I have the patch on my skin right now, okay? We're not doing the freaking natural method, but
this is what she had to say.
What the natural method is you get this app. There's one called Natural Cycles. There's like 1.6 million girls who use it or something.
Wow.
And you take your temperature every day the moment you open your eyes. Like you can't get up and use the restroom. Like you have to take your temperature as soon as you open your eyes around the same time every morning. And then you put your temperature into this app, and you also track your period and stuff. And basically on days where you're ovulating, which is when you can get pregnant.
So how do you know that? Are you about to say that right now? Okay. Like how?
Your temperature will spike.
Okay.
So did you know there's only 6 days out of a whole month that it's possible for you to get pregnant?
Yes, I did. My mom has told me that.
That's so crazy. Like in my head.
Wait, so you literally can't, I hit this. You literally can't get pregnant though the other days? Like I figured you still could. Or is it like a way higher chance?
On the Natural Cycles app, there will be days called pink days where it's like, there maybe still might be a possibility, but not like red days where like you're ovulating for sure.
There's a ton of misinformation here, so I will do my best to correct it. Let's start from the beginning. The menstrual cycle is the biological mechanism by which females are able to reproduce. This cycle is regulated by an interplay of 4 hormones: estradiol, progesterone, luteinizing hormone or LH, and follicle stimulating hormone or FSH. The cycle begins with the development of an egg in the ovary. Then in ovulation, the egg is released from the ovary and travels in the fallopian tubes. It's typically at this time the egg can be fertilized by a sperm and become an embryo. The developing embryo will then travel to the uterus and pregnancy begins. Otherwise, the unfertilized egg will disintegrate in the fallopian tubes. Meanwhile, the mucousy lining of the uterus, called the endometrium, is being thickened in preparation for an embryo to be implanted. If fertilization does not occur, this lining is sloughed off and ejected through the vagina, otherwise known as the period. The cycle starts again with the hormonal instigation of the ovary to produce another egg. Contraception or birth control is a technique by which fertilization of an egg is prevented, and there are a lot of different ways to do this. Hormonal birth control methods like the pill or the patch basically attempt to alter the natural interplay of hormones in the menstrual cycle. For example, the combined pill inhibits FSH production to prevent ovulation from occurring. Other methods like the copper IUD or intrauterine device work as a spermicidal implant in the uterus, basically killing all sperm before they reach the fallopian tubes. Some reliable low-tech methods like condoms, which has a plastic shield on the penis preventing semen from entering the vagina, are still popular. Natural family planning, or NFP, is a non-invasive method of contraception whereby women use biomarkers to determine the timeline of their menstrual cycle so as to avoid having sex on days during ovulation, which are more likely to result in pregnancy. In practice, this means that women using NFP will estimate their basal body temperature, or BBT, by taking their temperature as soon as they wake up. The idea is that the progesterone spike after ovulation will cause BBT to rise, giving an indication that the egg is ready to be fertilized, and therefore sex should be avoided on these days. Other biomarkers include an increase in cervical mucus production during ovulation. It's worth noting that contraception has a rich history of debate within the Catholic Church. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century said this, and this sentiment that all male emissions of semen had a divine purpose to impregnate and that all emissions to the contrary were grievous sins against nature was the prominent viewpoint for well over a millennia. This covers such bestial behaviors as masturbation and contraception. But times and attitudes change. The feminist movement in the early 1900s brought with it shifting attitudes toward contraception, promoted by pioneers like Margaret Sanger. Even then, however, a large portion of the population viewed fertility suppression as indicative of a degeneration of society. Fast forward to the modern day, where contraception is widely considered to be a boon to female sexual empowerment and prevention of unwanted pregnancy a responsible choice for couples not yet ready to raise children. Clearly, this modern logic is incompatible with the historic teachings of the Catholic Church, and a vast majority of Catholics polled in the late 90s and early 2000s believed that one could use contraception and still be a good Catholic. The relatively recent scientific discovery of NFP acted as a compromise of sorts and is now the official stance of the Catholic Church on contraception, and is usually promoted to engage couples during pre-Cana. I personally think there are some genuinely positive aspects to NFP to the extent that your body is not being pumped with hormones, and meticulous tracking of biomarkers can give you good insight into usually hidden bodily functions and can even aid in conception. But if preventing pregnancy is a life or death issue, general medical consensus is to use another form of contraception. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends other forms of contraception if preventing pregnancy is a high priority. The scientific data on NFP's effectiveness as a contraception strategy is not as thorough or supportive as it is for other methods of contraception, and there are reasons for this. First, NFP is extremely dependent on user adherence, specifically waking up at the same time every morning. So for someone like Haley, who openly has an irregular sleep schedule, this already seems like a non-starter.
I'm also the 7 on the Enneagram, where their biggest thing that they want is freedom, and to me, a sleep schedule that's regimented feels so,
it like restricts you. And
yeah,
like
it feels restrictive, and like, oh, but what if we want to spontaneously watch a movie tonight? Or what if I want to watch all these YouTube videos about interior design? Like, it just feels like, I'm just restricted by these rules.
That's funny.
Some studies have shown sample populations imperfectly using forms of NFP have fertility rates up to 25%. Moreover, the methods aren't standardized. Even in studies with populations having more favorable pregnancy prevention rates are not necessarily controlled for socioeconomic factors. But most of all, menstrual cycles are not equivalent across women. Lots of women have irregular cycles, thus impacting the effectiveness of NFP. Even within consistent standard 28-day cycles, there's no guarantee that the biomarkers conform to the general population. And when Haley says there are only 6 days of the week that you can get pregnant,
do you know there's only 6 days out of a whole month that it's possible for you to get pregnant?
that is patently false. Sperm can survive up to 5 days in the uterus, so for someone with irregular cycles, it's possible to get pregnant from having intercourse even during their period. What's most troubling about this podcast is that she draws a moral equivalency between the effectiveness of NFP and other birth control methods by the anecdotal evidence that Lily and she were both conceived while their parents were using contraception.
No. The thing is, though, that you can mess up on birth control. Like
you can.
Me and Lily here are products of moms who were taking the birth control pill. So at the end of the day, you're taking a risk either way. So which risk do you want to take?
So true.
The difference is that there are extensive peer-reviewed studies on the effectiveness of these kinds of artificial birth control that specifically enumerate the risk, while these conclusive studies for NFP flat out don't exist. You can't just equate the two to your audience. That's incorrect. So obviously there's significant blowback on this episode, causing Lily and Haley to delete the podcast. The following week, they issued an inept non-apology of spreading medical misinformation to their young audience. First, they expressed dismay that their good girl listeners on the podcast store could be so different from the impolite correctors on YouTube.
I think the YouTube space is just a very different one because the podcast community that we've built, I feel like, is super sweet girls. Like,
and they know us and they know our intentions is all I gotta say.
Yeah.
You know, because their good girl Christian audience has the mental capacity to question medical falsehoods, right? Then Haley immediately comes out and recommends that you consult a doctor before using birth control.
I just want to say, consult your doctor about birth control, and it's your body and it's your responsibility. So,
which, like, wow, great advice. How come you didn't follow that? And then she distances herself from the responsibility of presenting accurate information to her audience because, in her words,
you know, I'm 19, you're 21, and we were just personally sharing our experiences. It's not a recommendation.
No.
It's not a you should do this or you shouldn't do that.
It's called girl talk. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not we are doctors informing you. Like, it is the last thing from that.
And we understand.
It's also like,
what do
you expect?
I know.
That's so fucking dishonest. Look at the comments across your channels of young girls commending your maturity and tell me that you don't have the duty to accurately convey medical information. These kids literally see you as a role model, and you want me to believe that it's morally justifiable to idly discuss irresponsible medical behaviors without any disclaimers? Not to mention that on 3 separate occasions you made objectively false medical statements. And also, convenient that you want to describe yourself as a hapless 19-year-old girl that shouldn't be held responsible for being ignorant, but also want to portray yourself as mature beyond your years and ready for marriage.
The things that we said are controversial.
I reject that. Talking about politics is controversial. Talking about religion is controversial. Hell, even saying that Greece is a shitty place to travel is controversial. Telling young girls that they can only get pregnant 6 days out of the month is not controversial. It's just fucking wrong.
And the thing is that's not a Western idea. Like, that is not popular in the United States at all. And I've heard that it's more popular in Europe, and it's more of like a well-known idea. And over here, it is just against basically everything we've been taught.
Yeah, nice deflection, but I'm gonna need sources on that. I haven't found any data on NFP prevalence rates distinctly varying across countries. So based on how uneducated you are on other birth control topics, I'm gonna assume you made that one up. And then there's this gen.
And of course, doctors would like you to like buy birth control. They make a lot of money off of that.
I could do a whole episode.
Holy shit, you are so clueless. Here is a flowchart of how funds move in the outpatient prescription drug ecosystem. Notice that you don't see a bubble for doctors or physicians. You know why that is? Because it's fucking illegal for doctors to get kickbacks for selling drugs by US versus Brown. Not to say that it never happens, but when it does, it's for high margin brand name specialty drugs, not ass cheap birth control generics. So great, in your apology you tell viewers to consult doctors about birth control options, but then simultaneously accuse doctors of engaging in illegal kickback schemes to the detriment of their patients.
I don't know why she did that other than like getting money or a commission out of a CAT scan.
You probably should have learned not to disparage medical professionals after the Grease video, but I guess not. Lucky for you, Call Me Candid isn't popular enough to get you canceled again, but to be honest, you deserve it this time. And this informs the main issue with the Ryan and Haley experience, that the critical feedback mechanism does not function as it should, and the fault of that lies with Ryan and Haley's hubris. There are too many examples of this to cite, going back to Haley's history of deleting controversial videos, the botched Grease video apology, Ryan's last Twitter post where he suggested concerned fans were just jealous of his life, Haley's brazen dismissal of the birth control feedback, Ryan telling off his fans who think his toxic positivity is out of touch, Haley deleting negative comments on her YouTube and TikTok videos, the list goes on. Dissenting feedback is stifled to the point where the remaining audience is an army of young stans who have been conditioned to worship their queen's maturity, gush over the way her king looks at her.
Can't wait till they have kids. My parents got married when they were 13 and they've been together for 40 years.
That's why when the illusion of maturity breaks down completely, as with the Grease video, the house hunting videos, and even during the engagement, well-informed criticism gets labeled as unwarranted and excessive hate. The cohort of yes people you've culled are going to blindly cheer you on even as the lifelong commitments you've rushed into start to crumble. It's the haters, the meanies, and the former fans that are trying to tell you something substantive, that you are not ready for marriage. It's not because you're young, it's not because you're Christian, it's not because you're Republican, and it's not even because you're privileged and materialistic. We're telling you that you're not ready for marriage because your relationship has some serious flaws that you need to figure out, and you are nowhere near as mature as you advertise. So with all of this said, I would like to pose a new set of 31 questions to Ryan and Haley. At the beginning of your relationship, you took the survey 31 questions to fall in love. I'm titling this list 31 questions of real life shit. These questions are daunting, they are harsh, and they are unforgiving. But if you can honestly work through this list of questions, maybe you can film a Q&A about this one, probably would be the best content you've made in a while, you would be in a mature place in your relationship. What would you do if you found out Haley was pregnant tomorrow? How would you care for a child with a developmental disability? How would you handle raising an LGBT child? What expectations do you have for your children? Do you believe it's okay to discipline your child in public? Do you feel like making lots of money puts a wedge between you and your friends and family? How much money do each of you spend per month on average? What is your average income per month? What do you think your average income will be 5 years from now? Are you going to file your taxes independently or jointly for FY20? Haley, if money was tight and you could only contribute to supporting your mom or supporting your mortgage, which would you choose? What would you do if your mortgage payments became more than your income? How would you pay for a college education for two, for you, not for your kids? How would you handle moving for a new job opportunity? What age do you want to retire at? What would you do if sex isn't as good as you expect? How would you care for the other person if they suffered from depression? What would you do if flipping houses stops being fun? How will your social life change after marriage? Would you be willing to go to marital counseling if you have marital problems? Under what conditions would you leave the relationship? If you got a divorce, how would you split the house? Who would get Spock? If you separated, how would you pick up the pieces and move on? How would you care for your parents if they fell ill? What are things that you don't like about religion? How would you balance being a parent and going to college at the same time? What would you do if one of you loses a passion for religion? How do you know that your relationship is not just a phase? How will you balance individual autonomy and identity with teamwork and union in a marriage? How will your relationship change if you are the only people living together in a house? What is one thing you would change about the relationship? Is there anything you are not willing to give up once you get married? What is your biggest fear about marriage? Let's just pile on here, why not? Remember in 2018 when Haley's biggest controversy was that she abandoned her family dogs that clearly weren't cared for and only a few months later basically replaced them with Spock? And also that Spock is untrained?
You definitely know you're my friend if you have a scar on the back of your ankle from Spock biting you.
Is it? Remember that time Ryan and Haley are literally planning a wedding during a global pandemic, going out in public without masks and having large gatherings with friends, even traveling across state lines and planning an international honeymoon trip? Remember that time Ryan centered his entire Neptune advertising campaign around environmental friendliness, and now they go to Starbucks and get plastic cups like 5 times a day? Remember that time Haley announced a new $60 tie-dye pajama edition to the Retro Reprise line, and come to find out the exact item was actually available on Amazon for $30, and she didn't clarify that the product was wholesale and not a designed item until after it sold out? Isn't that exactly what Ryan was making fun of Soulja Boy for doing?
Well, it was revealed that you could get the exact same console without the Soulja branding on AliExpress for a fraction of the price.
Remember that time Haley bought a bunch of cheap wedding dresses on Amazon and tried them just to shit on them? You know, because everyone has the luxury to purchase custom wedding dresses.
I actually feel like I'm about to go tackle some boys on the field.
Remember that time Ryan and Haley moved 40 minutes out of Austin because they're grossed out by homeless people?
This area is known for people heckling you in your car, and that just happened to me. And now he's cussing at me? That is good. I can't wait to move to a suburb because I literally have anxiety leaving my house for reasons like that. Now it's different if they're nice. It's not like I don't give to the homeless, obviously, but sometimes they're literally just trying to like harass you and scare you.
Remember that time Haley didn't want to go to Coachella because she felt anxious around other influencers, but then said it was because that Philip guy was funding anti-LGBT groups, but she still goes to Chick-fil-A every week?
I mean, I always just want Chick-fil-A, so...
Remember that time Ryan and Haley have a gorgeous kitchen in their house, but still go out to eat every day? Remember that time Haley knocked over all of Ryan's shit to film a TikTok and didn't pick it up? Remember that time Haley said you can literally just choose your own life?
Yeah. Making the goal happiness is such a mindset shift.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know. It's just crazy. It's crazy how you can just choose your life.
You really can.
Like, some people could see this conversation as like, well, not everyone can just choose their life. Like, you know, moving out and living alone is expensive, but you found this insane deal that was like you were living with roommates. And like my cousin, she lived with roommates and her mental health was suffering a lot from it. You know, money's tighter now that she's just living alone, but you can make things work, you know? Like if you're going to college and you hate your major and you're just doing it because you think, you know, your parents want you to do it, or you're going to make an income that you think is good, at the end of the day, your happiness matters more. So like change your major to art, even though that's riskier.
Yeah.
And
She should have told that to the homeless people in Austin that she was afraid of. Like,
Bro, why you homeless? Choose your own life, bro.
remember that time Ryan and Haley are actively promoting the charlatan douchebag Edgar Sandoval Jr. who said masks do nothing and to trust your immune system to God? Remember that time Haley put the BLM square up on her Instagram feed for 24 hours and then took it down because it didn't fit the aesthetic, and then claimed that she took a week off of posting out of respect for the movement?
I didn't post for a full week to honor the Black Lives Matter movement. And
Remember that time Haley said that people concerned that she was too young to get married and might get divorced are actually projecting their own worries about divorce on her?
so much of the time, people projecting their own fears onto you, like especially when it comes to marriage when you're young. Everyone is so scared of divorce, and they're probably so scared of it in their own lives that they're like projecting onto you, like, do not do that, like you're bound to get divorced and like that's gonna be terrible for you, when like in reality they're just scared for themselves, you know?
Remember that time Haley left her groceries in her car for 48 hours?
Got up and I was like, wait a second, I never got my groceries out of the car.
That's insane.
And I couldn't believe it, because it was just one of those things that had so slipped my mind for like over 2 days basically.
That's literally crazy.
Isn't that crazy? Like for a full 24 hours I didn't think about it at all, which just goes to show you how I never eat real food, because I never grocery shop and like make food ever. And so yeah, we went into the car to get it. It still smells bad in here. And
remember that time Haley can't decide whether losing her virginity is not a big deal at all or a massive change?
wait till marriage will even tell you like adding sex to a relationship isn't going to change it, and it's only going to be about like 5% of the relationship or something low like that. So, but I think it'll only change in one way.
Are you gonna say?
No.
What?
We'll just have to make sure he avoids us at the house.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that would be very bad.
You're not gonna be able to make fun of me anymore for being a virgin.
Don't do that.
Remember that time Haley was 15 and roasting her uncle for living in a massive house? That one aged well.
Like touch grass, I was like, it's not at all. I do one of my modeling jobs here.
Haley, what are your pros and cons of this place?
The lighting is bad.
Remember that time Haley said,
how much do you really need in life? Like,
apparently a $1.5 million. I want to conclude this essay with a personal reflection. I agonized for months, basically since the engagement, over whether I should create this behemoth. Because if this situation is as much of a powder keg as I think, this video has potential to seriously hurt people. I couldn't imagine being Ryan or Haley and seeing a 2-hour deconstruction of the flaws in my personal life and my relationship, and I have to be okay with the fact that this might seriously affect them going forward. I have to be okay with advertisers potentially removing themselves from their brand, and for as much as I roasted Ryan and Haley for overextending themselves to buy the mansion, this might only make it more difficult. Not to mention that their families are financially dependent on a positive image of Ryan and Haley on the internet, an image that I'm deliberately trying to tarnish. I have to be okay with angry people using this document as a vessel to promote their own agendas that I might not necessarily agree with. Things like a blanket hatred of Christianity and religion, or the narrative that Haley ruined Ryan, which in my opinion is incorrect, not to mention sexist. And I have to accept that I totally circumvented the grace that I give people in my everyday life by putting in such a huge effort into dissecting so many quotes and grievances from their content. But in the end, their output is a massive problem that needs to be corrected. You can't just present medical falsehoods about birth control to your audience without repercussion. You can't promote an unhealthy parochial view of sex without consequence. You can't be a performative activist. You can't present a warped view of personal finance. You can't be uneducated, ignorant, petulant, entitled, materialistic, judgmental, arrogant, immature, irresponsible children without being called out. In a previous draft of this epilogue, I wanted to strike a more conciliatory tone. I wanted to empathize with how extenuating their personal circumstances were that could lead to ignorance, and that underneath it all, Ryan and Haley aren't bad people. I wanted to emphasize how technology democratizes celebrity and all of the problems that come with it, and how it's not just Ryan and Haley being fundamentally flawed, but that there's a whole algorithmic system driven by this new purchasing power of advertising to teens and preteens, such that responsible checks and balances on the ethics of their content are bypassed to cater to this young audience, thus enabling their behavior. But as I put this project together, as I scoured their content for quotes and listened to hours and hours of their personal philosophies over the years, I couldn't help but be dissuaded from the sympathetic viewpoint. Their lack of accountability is fucking maddening, and whether it's their personal worldviews that need to be remedied or an entire supporting system that needs to be dismantled, something has to change here. And I think the most disappointing thing is that I used to be a huge fan of Ryan. I remember 3 years ago, like every week, my wife and I would pull up YouTube on the TV and we'd be like, gee, wonder what Ryan's up to. It was rewarding to see him put so much effort and quite literally love into his content. I had the Neptune bottles even. And when the Lauren Gray video blew up and he hit the big time, we were both so proud of him because it was like he did it the right way, you know? Like he wasn't a fame-hungry or money-hungry narcissist that exploited people for his own benefit. He was just a really nice outgoing kid that worked hard and loved what he did. So it was really disheartening to see him transition over the past 2 years into kind of an arrogant dick. As much as I've condemned Ryan and Haley for their actions, I truly wish them the best and I'm rooting for them to work it out. I don't know what the ultimate outcome of this video will be, but I'm hoping that it precipitates a newfound sense of accountability and maybe even an improvement in their relationship content that reflects not a curated, childish distortion of marriage, but an adult representation of reality. At the very least, I hope this video causes Ryan and Haley to press pause on their lives, which are wildly careening towards some kind of unfavorable outcome. Lastly, I want to thank the ladies at the GD Discord for all of your hard work, knowledge, and support. Without your help, none of this would have been possible. Ryan TRAHAN and Haley PHAM need to press pause before they make an irreversible decision that could affect them for the rest of their lives.